Chapter 738. Go away. Feng Ling abruptly kicked away the two doctors around the bed. But at the moment when she got up, she fell back on the bed because she had just been injected with a tranquilizer. Seeing her stubborn look, the doctor said to the person next to him, "Look at this child's temper. He refuses to accept treatment even when he is injured. How can he live in the orphanage in the future? You are kind enough to accept him, but I don't think he wants to appreciate your kindness." The director of an international orphanage in Los Angeles did not speak at first, and then looked thoughtfully at the 12-year-old child on the bed. This child was a member of an underground mafia group that the American police wiped out half a month ago. He was young and an orphan. According to the police, this child was named Feng Ling. When he was 5 years old, his boss found him in a wolf cave on the mountain. At that time, Feng Ling could not speak and could only bark. He was a baby raised by wolves. When he was 5 years old, his boss took him away and trained him to be their puppet. Because of his young age, he was not guarded by the enemy when he went out on missions, and he had the shrewdness and decisiveness of a wolf. Even though he was young, he was trusted by his boss. Because of his young age and the way he grew up, the police believed that his nature should not be bad because of the environment he grew up in, so they did not put him on the criminal list and only sent him to the orphanage. When Feng Ling was sent in, his body was covered with wounds, but if the doctor hadn't given him a tranquilizer, the room would have been torn apart by him. 1 year later, Feng Ling sensed that something was wrong. She abruptly opened her eyes, only to see a little girl in a pink dress standing by his bed with a curious expression. She was holding a flower in her hand and staring at him with a red face. In a trance, Feng Ling moved his hand and felt that the amount of tranquilizer the doctor gave him this morning was not much. After a year of drug control, she had no extra energy every day and could only get up to eat and walk at most. This was the method that the director of the orphanage came up with. He kept her in order to cooperate with the police, but did not allow her to have too much energy to make trouble. He arranged her alone in a dark and depressing room, where she could only see the stars through the small lattice window. "Brother Feng Ling, why do you sleep alone in the small room every day?" The little girl by the bed grew up in an orphanage. She was only 12 or 13 years old, but she seemed to know what it meant to like someone. When she looked at Feng Ling, her eyes were watery and full of expectation. Feng Ling ignored him and got off the bed. Feng Ling had always lived in this room alone. She was used to such darkness and looked at the mirror. The youth in the mirror was tall and slender. Even though he was only 13 years old, he looked much taller than many of his peers. His face was pale and cold, and his eyes were so bright that even the stars outside the window couldn't compare. His messy, jet-black hair looked slightly dispirited. With a casual flick, his short hair instantly looked much more supple and docile. The little girl was dumbfounded as she watched from the side. Feng Ling was the best-looking boy in the orphanage, but he usually didn't like to interact with others or make friends. No matter when he was eating or being called to group classes by the teachers of the orphanage, he would always sit in the corner coldly and quietly. He had a completely unapproachable temper. The boys especially hated him because almost all the girls liked to sneak glances at him. Even if he had a bad temper, the girls would always find opportunities to approach him, although every time they tried, they would get cold indifference. Although this beautiful boy's temper was really cold, there seemed to be deep whirlpools in his eyes like stars in the darkness, bright and dazzling. He was so beautiful, but he was not as annoying as other boys. He always came and went alone. The black earring on the boy's ear seemed to carry a sharp, dark light, mysterious and unfathomable. Feng Ling closed his eyes, and the extraordinarily beautiful boy in the mirror also closed his eyes. "Brother Feng Ling, do you want to go eat with me? I heard that the cook made hamburgers today." Hearing the shy and noisy voice of the little girl, Feng Ling frowned impatiently. "Shut up and get out." The little girl should have been afraid, but she had long known his temper, so she walked over and handed him the flower in her hand nervously. "Brother Feng Ling, I just want to be friends with you. Feng Ling's eyes opened instantly. In this dim and narrow room, it was like a dagger lurking in the dark for a long time, making people shudder. He glanced at her coldly, and the little girl was frightened by his eyes. She immediately dropped the flower, turned around, and staggered out. The room was quiet again, and the boy in front of the mirror looked indifferent. When she was taken out of a wolf's cave at the age of 5, she knew that she was not a wolf, but a human, and gradually understood that she was a girl. But in the world of the mafia, she had to dress up as a boy to be able to move freely. She had to train and carry out tasks as a boy to have food. Otherwise, she could only be killed as trash. If she wanted to live, she could only forget the fact that she was a girl. As time went by, even she couldn't remember whether she was a man or a woman. She remembered that when she was in the hands of the mafia, she once sneaked into the headquarters of the FBI to install a listening device. Many American police had dispatched a large number of police cars in order to catch her, but she still managed to escape. Even a few strong police officers were no match for her. But she never expected that in the past year, she was controlled here by these so-called doctors who save the dying and help the wounded with a tranquilizer a day. The front door of the orphanage was rarely open, and 3 or 4 tall, top-grade military Hummers were parked outside. The door was opened. Boss, a member of 11 Base who was about to finish his service, stood in front of the door and looked respectfully and solemnly at the man who got out of the car. "Here we are." Nan Hung responded indifferently and walked in. Seeing that the rumored Nan Hung finally appeared, the director of the orphanage hurried to greet him. "Mr. Lee, it was your father who came here to select people a few years ago. Today is the first time I see you, Mr. Lee. Please forgive me for my negligence." Chapter 739. Yes, but Mr. Lee, you're the person in charge of 11 Base after all. The children in our orphanage will rely on you to take care of them in the future. They are all fatherless children and are very naughty. If they can pass the training of 11 Base and become the pillars of the future, it will be really a good thing. Nan Hung ignored the director's politeness. The quadrennial screening of 11 Base was just a routine. Usually, only 1/10 of the people could be selected by 11 Base for training, and sometimes even less than 1/10. After all, not everyone had the ability to pass the tests and checkpoints set up by 11 Base. To become a member of 11 Base, one had to be fully qualified in both physical and mental quality and physical quality. When the rumored eldest son of the Lee family, Lee Nan Hung, walked in and completely appeared in everyone's sight, the female teacher who had been teaching the children in the orphanage for many years was instantly stunned. His eyebrows were sharp, his eyes were deep, his nose was high, and his thin lips were slightly pursed. Was this man painted? As early as an hour ago, almost everyone in the orphanage, from the director to the cleaners, gathered in front of the door, waiting for the legendary eldest son of the Lee family, Lee Nan Hung, to appear. The Lee clan had great achievements and accomplishments in assisting the military affairs of both China and the United States. On the surface, they were mainly doing business, but in reality, they had the world's largest training base in the dark, providing elite talents to the two countries' militaries. The Lee family also had an extraordinary position in the United Nations Department. They kept a low profile because they controlled more than half of the military administration in the United States, and the Los Angeles police and other police forces in the United States could be deployed by them at any time. The so-called Lee family, in more than half of the legal areas in the United States, could even shake the coastline 10,000 meters away with a casual stomp of their feet. Lee Nan Hung grew up in 11 Base. As the eldest son of the Lee family and the person in charge of 11 Base, he was mysterious. Now that he suddenly appeared here, everyone in the orphanage was trembling. It was said that this man came in person and had a bad temper. Several well-dressed boys surrounded the tall and thin boy in the orphanage cafeteria. Feng Ling narrowed her eyes, and the surrounding temperature suddenly froze to the extreme. With a clatter, the meal Feng Ling had just fetched was snatched by one of them and fell to the ground, spilling soup and food all over the floor. Someone even kicked the chair behind Feng Ling away and looked at him with a gloomy face. "Brat, you've only been in the orphanage for a year. Do you really think you're a young master? You can only pretend to be deaf and dumb when we talk to you, right? I really don't want to stay in the orphanage with people like you for another second. When we are selected into 11 Base, you can continue to stay in this damn place and wait for death. Anyway, Director Lin always treats you as a deaf and mute, and even your name is not on the selection list of the base. Tut, what a useless waste. 11 base? Feng Ling's eyes were cold, but she remained calm. When she was working for the Mafia, she did hear of 11 base. It was said that it was a place related to the military training of the National Defense Forces and had a deep connection with the American police. It was a mysterious place that was very difficult to provoke, and it was a place that made many underground mafia in the United States tremble with fear. However, the base had nothing to do with her. She hated people who were too arrogant in front of her. If you don't want to stay, get out of here. Do you have to bark in front of me? Or do you want to be selected into that base with a swollen face? Feng Ling's expression was very indifferent, and her voice was as careless as her expression. Get out of my sight in 3 seconds. Brat, how dare you be so arrogant? TSK, your origin is unknown, but your name is very nice. You're called something Feng, something Ling. I heard that there's a very famous Chinese family in the United States with a surname Feng. That's a good family that you won't be able to get into. Who gave you the courage to give yourself such a name? When Feng Ling was taken out of the wolf's cave at the age of 5, she had been wearing a jade plate engraved with the word Feng on her neck. At that time, there were several Chinese in that group who could read Chinese characters, so they directly took the word Feng as her surname. Since then, she has been called Feng Ling, ignored the provocation of these boys, and was about to turn around when she suddenly heard one of them reach out to hold her down. Her eyes flickered. This morning, when the doctor gave her a sedative, he was probably still asleep and pulled out the needle halfway. Feng Ling, who had long developed a resistance to this kind of sedative because she had been taking sedatives for a long time, was not as weak as usual. She buckled her shoulder with one hand and easily turned her wrist. Suddenly, there was a crack sound of wrist dislocation, followed by a scream. His hand is disabled? Feng Ling turned back lazily, still casually glancing back at the boy who was holding his wrist in pain and twitching all over. At the same time, she coldly glanced at the others. Brat, how dare you hit me? The man whose wrist was dislocated instantly roared in anger. His face was twisted in pain, and he shouted, Hold him down. Take off his clothes. Throw him into the yard for those girls to see. I want to have Asterisk King see how much guts he has. Not only did Feng Ling not panic because of his words, but those people also did not expect that he actually had some skills. After all, in the past year, Feng Ling had always been alone. No one knew what his real situation was. They only knew that he had a cold temper and was not to be trifled with. Unexpectedly, as soon as the group of people pounced forward, they did not see Feng Ling make any obvious movements. She only raised her hand casually, but with a carefree and unrestrained fierceness, the empty bowl on the table next to her, which someone had just finished eating with a pa sound, passed through the crowd and smashed hard against the boy's forehead. The person who was hit raised his dislocated hand, covered his instantly bloody forehead in pain, and fell to the ground. They did not expect Feng Ling to have such skills. Those boys who were about the same age as her, about 13 or 14 years old, instantly froze, not knowing whether to hit her or not. And at this moment, Feng Ling kicked the lower body of one of them. Immediately, another scream sounded. When they reacted, Feng Ling had nimbly flashed out of the encirclement of these people. She expressionlessly picked up the plate on the ground and turned to continue to get food. Damn, this brat. Forget it, just wait. Sooner or later, someone will deal with him. Feng Ling acted as if she did not hear it. She put the food on a new plate, walked to a clean table not far away, and sat down without looking back. Chapter 740. Hearing this, Feng Ling casually picked up the disposable chopsticks of average quality and turned to look at him. Whether I can be killed or not is a matter for the future. But if you say one more word, I don't mind sending you to hell right now. The boy with blood all over his head. Damn, this Feng Ling had only been in the orphanage for more than a year. He had never contacted anyone. Today was the first time he had seen him fight. She didn't expect him to be so powerful. At night, this was the largest orphanage in Los Angeles, and there were a lot of adopted children. The people of 11 Base arrived at the orphanage in the afternoon. There were a lot of children on the list. They needed to stay here for one night and continue the screening tomorrow. Feng Ling fell asleep on time. After all, she had nothing else to do. However, she suddenly heard the sound of someone walking outside the window. It was rustling, and she knew that the other party was very sneaky and not very aboveboard. It was just an orphanage. How could a thief sneak in? Feng Ling opened her eyes, sat up from the hard bed, looked at the figure flashing by outside the window, got up, and walked out. However, when she walked towards the courtyard behind the orphanage, which was specially used to receive adoptive parents and guests, she suddenly saw the boys in the cafeteria during dinner and heard their cursing from a distance. Where did that surnamed Feng come from? He was so ruthless. My head still hurts. Just when they were still cursing, one of them suddenly keenly noticed the movement. The moment he turned to look at Feng Ling, who was walking slowly in the dark, their faces changed in an instant. What are you doing here? Feng Ling didn't answer. The movement she heard just now was definitely coming in this direction, but that person had obviously hidden himself. She just glanced at the bushes around expressionlessly. We have already warned you that after the candidates of our 11 base leave, you can only wait for death. What? You know you're not on the list of this screening, so you come out in the middle of the night to ask Bosley for a place? Let me tell you, stay away from Bosley. Otherwise, you won't even know how you die. Seeing that Feng Ling still didn't seem to hear their words and didn't pay attention to them, the boy whose wrist had been twisted by Feng Ling and whose forehead was wrapped with a circle of gauze said angrily, "Damn, he is so arrogant. I don't believe he dares to fight against us with the people of 11 Base nearby. Drag him into the water behind us. Today, we should let him know that this is not a place where he can continue to be arrogant." There were twice as many people gathered here tonight as in the cafeteria. There were about a dozen in total. The group of people instantly felt that Feng Ling was going to be unlucky this time. However, just as the dozen or so people stood up and rushed toward her, Feng Ling raised her leg and kicked the fastest person to the ground. In an instant, she grabbed the second person's neck and turned her hand. With a beautiful backhand, she pressed the person under her legs, raised her leg, and stepped hard on his back. She bent one knee and stepped on the person. At the same time, she looked coldly at the others who were slow and hesitant. Go ahead if you want to die. The person who was kicked to the ground first felt pain in his internal organs. He raised his eyes in disbelief and wanted to curse but couldn't. He felt that as soon as he opened his mouth, he would spit out blood. Just as the third person was hesitantly about to pounce on her from behind, Feng Ling casually glanced back. When that person saw that she had discovered him, he immediately rushed forward angrily. However, at the moment he rushed over, Feng Ling calmly dodged him. There was no need for her to move at all. The trash in front of her directly pounced on the person she had just stepped on. The two people staggered and fell heavily to the ground at the same time. One of them even hit his head on the stone, instantly joining the group of people with broken heads and bleeding heads, seeing that Feng Ling didn't seem to be struggling at all, as if even if a dozen of them rushed up at the same time, they would be trampled under her feet at any time. Most of the remaining people had seen her in the canteen, so they didn't dare to step forward again. After hesitating for a long time, they took a few steps back. If you're not blind, you should be able to see that I have a bad temper. Don't provoke me. Otherwise, I don't mind crippling you here tonight. However, now that you're injured like this, I'm afraid you're not even qualified to be selected by 11 Base. Feng Ling coldly opened her pale lips and said emotionlessly. After saying this, she continued to walk in the direction of the back courtyard, as if nothing had happened, completely ignoring the dozen or so boys who were stunned on the spot, and continuing to focus on the person hiding in the dark. Just after Feng Ling left, on the second floor of the guest room, not far away, two members of 11 Base stood there and talked. This boy is good at martial arts, and his aptitude is much better than this group of good-for-nothings. The other man leaned against the window, glanced at the figure that Feng Ling was chasing forward, and said meaningfully, "Someone broke in. He should be planning to directly attack Bosley. This boy seems to have noticed that someone is coming and has the courage to chase after him alone. Now we are outside the base. It's not surprising that someone is not afraid of death and wants to take the opportunity to make trouble. Boss has always been very vigilant. We don't need to take action at all. Let's just wait and see. Just as the man finished speaking, the two men turned their eyes and saw that Feng Ling was following the figure in the dark to the sauna room behind. Gee, their bossly liked to take a bath in the sauna room at night. Although the sauna room in this orphanage was shabby, he didn't miss it. Now he was taking a bath in it. If two people sneaked in at this time, they didn't know what would happen inside. Where did he go? Feng Ling chased all the way here and saw that in front of her was the simple sauna room set up in the orphanage. The surroundings were all wooden structures, and there seemed to be lights inside. Logically speaking, it was impossible for that person to sneak in. After all, the angle of the door and the angle of the window made it impossible for him to get in. But in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Turning to look at a towering tree beside the wooden sauna room, she quickly climbed up the tree and then quickly stepped on the roof. When she suddenly saw that the man had escaped to the eaves not far away, she immediately rushed over with a cold face and was about to follow him. However, the moment she turned around, she heard the sound of the wooden planks on the roof breaking. She didn't know whether the roof had been trampled by the man just now or because it had been in disrepair for a long time. With a kacha sound, Feng Ling fell from between the three wooden boards. Her hand was about to grab the edge of the board, but the wooden board on the edge also cracked. In less than half a second, Feng Ling's body suddenly fell down weightlessly and fell into a pool of hot water with a thud. Then she abruptly popped her head out of the water and suddenly met a pair of cold black eyes in the mist. Chapter 741. In the misty air, Feng Ling couldn't see his face clearly and could only see a trace of coldness in his dark eyes. She never expected that the wooden sauna room of the orphanage had been in disrepair for so many years that the roof was broken, and she didn't expect that the person below was actually taking a bath. The man who was taking a bath in the huge wooden tub in the sauna room had soaked for a long time, and his healthy, wheat-colored skin looked a little pale. When he looked at the boy who only had half his head exposed in the water through the steam, his lazy and cold aura made people instinctively feel danger. What? Do you want to take a bath together? Feng Ling wanted to say that she was not interested, but at this moment, she came here to chase the person who was lurking in the dark. She couldn't explain herself if she fell down like this. At first glance, she knew that the man in front of her was not a good person. There had never been such a person in the orphanage, so this man should be from 11 base, but she didn't know what kind of position he had in 11 base. She still calmly submerged half of her face in the water, and the short hair on her head almost covered half of her face because of the water. She could only vaguely see a pair of indifferent and cold eyes through the wet hair. Seeing that she didn't move, Nan Hung still sat calmly in the bathtub, his muscular arms casually resting on the edge of the bathtub, and his long and narrow black eyes narrowed. He saw the vigilance and the idea of escaping gradually blossoming in her eyes. The man raised the corner of his mouth coldly. At the moment when she suddenly emerged from the water, he instantly grabbed one of her wrists and backhandedly pulled her back. Nan Heng's speed was so fast that Feng Ling almost couldn't dodge. She had been controlled by tranquilizers here for a whole year and hadn't fought with anyone for a long time. In the blink of an eye, Feng Ling changed from underestimating the enemy to resisting in the next second. She pulled her wrist out of the man's hand as fast as a nimble snake. It was so smooth because both of them had water on them, and there was some special bath lotion in the water, so it was much smoother than usual. Nan Hung didn't see the boy's back until she turned around and was about to run. Judging from his figure and back, he was just a child in his teens. The enemy definitely didn't send him here, but how could there be such a child in this orphanage? When he was about to chase after him, he didn't put on his clothes because he was taking a bath. Instead, he pulled off a bath towel and quickly wrapped it around his lower body. Then, he leaped forward and grabbed the teenager's shoulder when the teenager was about to run out of the sauna room. However, when he was about to turn the teenager around to see the teenager's face, the teenager, who had his back to him, quickly pulled off the bath towel and covered the teenager's head with it when he caught a glimpse of the teenager's white lower body. Nanheng couldn't see his face clearly. At the same time, his lower body felt cold, and the towel on his head almost covered him. He raised his hand coldly and waved, and the towel instantly flew to the other side like a living thing. It wrapped itself into a messy ball, smashed heavily on the wall, and then fell to the ground. Feng Ling's movements were still very fast. At the moment when her face was about to be seen clearly, she knew that she probably couldn't escape from the main door. She turned around and rushed back to the bathtub, intending to jump out of the hole on it. At the moment when the person behind her was about to catch her, she reached into the bathtub, scooped up the water, and splashed it hard on his face. Nanheng once again raised his hand to block, but just as the other party was about to take the opportunity to step on the edge of the bathtub and jump up, he instantly rushed forward like an agile cheetah, grabbed her left sleeve, and fiercely pulled her down. In the end, there was only the sound of cloth tearing. Feng Ling's long-sleeve clothes were torn from the shoulder down, revealing most of the white skin below the shoulder. Both of them paused. Feng Ling's expression turned cold, but Nanheng paused for a moment. His cold brows instantly raised with some interest. Even if he only saw it for a moment, he could clearly see the porcelain white skin and the half of the undeveloped soft and round half that was faintly discernible under the torn clothes. Even if he was still a teenager, the already developed part was too clear a sign of his gender. Female? The moment this thought flashed through his mind, he pulled another hanging bath towel to cover his lower body. Feng Ling's expression was ugly as she swept her leg across the water. She was so angry that she almost flipped the entire bathtub over, causing more than half of the water inside to splash out. All of it was splashed toward Nanheng, who had temporarily stopped because he had discovered her gender. Taking advantage of the 2 seconds when his eyes were smeared with the bath liquid and instinctively closed his eyes, she pulled a towel by the side and wrapped it around her head to cover her face. When she turned around to attack him, her attacks were even fiercer, as though filled with killing intent. Nanheng only closed his eyes for 2 seconds. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the young man's initial attempt to dodge and escape to instantly attack him with murderous intent. The corners of his lips curled up indifferently, and he dodged without leaving a trace. He raised his hand and took the opportunity to pull off the young man's torn sleeve. In an instant, Feng Ling's entire arm was exposed. Her chest, that had previously been faintly discernible, as well as her slender waist, were all presented in front of the man's eyes. He spoke unhurriedly. "Are you angry from embarrassment? Not bad at such a young age. And you're even a girl? How did you sneak in?" Feng Ling was enraged. She turned to the side and kicked the wall with one leg, borrowing the force to kick him again. After Nanheng noticed her age and that she was a girl, he did not attack again. Under her furious attacks, he only moved very casually to defend himself. He pushed her leg away with one hand, then backhanded her, and was kicked away by her. He did not have the slightest intention of fighting seriously. It was as though he was casually teasing a teenage girl. Feng Ling had seen all kinds of bloody storms since she was young, but she had never been teased by a man. She was so angry that she wanted to kill him instantly. However, she could clearly feel that he was very agile. If he really wanted to fight seriously, she was afraid that she would not be his match. At the same time, from the corner of her eye, she saw the clothes of the man placed not far away. It seemed like he had a gun. People with guns were more difficult to deal with. Chapter 742. Nanheng frowned in pain and was about to make a move. However, this time, Feng Ling did not intend to be entangled with him. She quickly dodged his palm and leaped onto the edge of the bathtub. With the help of the wall of the wooden house that was not too high, she stepped on it and jumped out nimbly. Seeing that she had escaped, Nanheng didn't look shocked but just coldly narrowed his eyes at the cracked hole in the sauna room. A girl who could have such skills in this orphanage was definitely not ordinary. He had planned to test her background and then figure out her purpose, but it turned out that her ultimate goal was obviously not him. Otherwise, she would not have escaped so easily. He's just a teenager. What was her identity? Nanhung slowly withdrew his cold and indifferent gaze and glanced at the sleeve thrown on the ground. The next day, the broadcast in the orphanage rang. The voice was obviously from Director Lin himself. He summoned all the children in the orphanage to the empty field in front of him. No matter men or women, they must all be present. After the broadcast, the director turned back and respectfully looked at Nanhung, who looked calm. "Mr. Lee, these children will arrive soon. We thought that you would select them from the list provided by the orphanage, but we didn't expect that Mr. Lee, despite being so busy, didn't intend to leave any child with potential behind and planned to meet each and every one of them. This is really a great blessing for them." Nanhung was indifferent and silent. He just stood on the second floor in front of the field and held the railing. The view here was the best and clearest. He looked at the teenagers who gradually appeared in the empty field, half male and half female. Before the headmaster could finish his words of flattery, the children below shouted excitedly when they saw the people above them. Li Nanhung, they actually saw the legendary young master, Li of 11 Base. The Li family was powerful in the military and had the most mysterious and desirable 11 Base in their hands. The whereabouts of young Master Li had always been a mystery and an unattainable existence. But now, the legendary young Master Li was standing on the second floor of the stadium in front of their orphanage. He was even looking at them. The children were so excited, as if they would be selected to join 11 Base in the next second. 11 Base was directly connected to the U.S. military and police. As long as they could become a member of 11 Base, they would never have to worry about food and clothing in the future, and they might even have the opportunity to obtain military exploits, whether in the military or in politics. This was not an opportunity that ordinary people could get. If he could do well in 11 Base, it would be an opportunity to reach the sky in a single bound. All the children in the orphanage had arrived. More than 100 children, ranging from 5 to 18 years old, were present. The director called the names one by one, and the children who were called would stand up and respond. However, after spending more than an hour, the 100 or so children had all appeared, but the one Nanhung was looking for was nowhere to be seen. He was sure that the teenager from last night was from the orphanage because the sleeve that was torn off was the uniform that every child in the orphanage had to wear. It was a black long-sleeved uniform similar to the school uniform, and the name and logo of the orphanage were on the cuffs. But she was not among the more than 100 children. Nanhung's eyes swept over the faces of the children one by one, and he said lightly, "Are you sure they are all here?" "Yes, they're all here. Our orphanage is the largest orphanage run by Chinese people in Los Angeles. At present, there are a total of 127 unadopted children under the age of 18, and all of them are here." The director echoed with a smile. "But 11 Base never accepts girls, right? Why did you suddenly ask for girls to come out today, Mr. Lee?" Nanhung didn't answer, but just looked at the faces that were looking in this direction and the uniform these children were wearing. 127, not a single one was missing. Seeing young Master Lee's cold eyes looking at the faces and figures of those children, not knowing what he was looking at or waiting for, the director and other teachers and people in charge of the orphanage all stood aside, not daring to ask a word. The crowd in the venue had gradually become excited. Everyone who was stared at by young Master Lee's eyes, whether they were men or women, was full of surprise, and they always felt that happiness was about to come to them. Only Feng Ling, who was sent to the orphanage by the police a year ago, was not included in the list of orphans because of special circumstances. Later, no matter in the group knowledge class or other aspects, everyone only knew that she was here, but they didn't specifically add her name to the list. As a result, when everyone was summoned today, they were so excited that they forgot that there was such a special person in the orphanage. They only checked the number of people in the orphanage and forgot the person who was locked in the dark little room. It was true that Feng Ling usually didn't communicate with others. After being injected with a tranquilizer in the morning, she went to the canteen to eat when she had the strength, and when she had no strength, she waited for the doctor to bring her food. Unless it was necessary, she never appeared in front of others or contacted others, so it was easy to be forgotten. And on such an occasion, even if he accidentally thought of her, he didn't intend to let her appear. Feng Ling was an uncontrollable and bad-tempered boy. If that boy accidentally provoked Li Nanheng, it would be a big trouble for the orphanage. She must not come. However, for some reason, young Master Li's temper was unpredictable. He was usually low-key and mysterious, and now they couldn't figure out what he was thinking. However, Li Nanheng's cold eyes made the president and the others panic. What made them even more nervous was that when young Master Li looked at them, they couldn't tell whether he was indifferent or indifferent. His king-like cold aura made those who were excited at the beginning gradually calm down, and they didn't even dare to breathe. And on the other side, Feng Ling lay on the bed in her dark room, her eyes slightly open, looking at the dim ceiling in a familiar daze. After coming back last night, she simply washed up, changed her clothes, and lay down to sleep. Although she was still half awake at night, the person hiding in the corner didn't appear again. It wasn't until dawn that she fell asleep completely. After falling asleep, a doctor came in on time to give her a tranquilizer. The doctor's movement and the smell of disinfectant on him were very familiar. After a year of contact, Feng Ling instinctively continued to sleep, completely ignoring the doctor. Anyway, they had thousands of ways to inject the tranquilizer into her, and she had long been too lazy to resist. Chapter 743. When it was almost noon, Feng Ling gradually recovered her strength and sat up from the bed. When she was in the hands of the mafia, she was still young. Even if her body had gone through the normal development stage, she didn't pay much attention to the changes in her figure. This year, she rarely contacted others, and she was also used to wearing loose clothes, so she didn't pay much attention to it. What happened last night made Feng Ling more vigilant. She got up and looked around the room, finally finding a soft dress that she hadn't worn for a long time, and then dug out a dagger she had hidden under the mattress for a long time. She cut the clothes into a continuous strip of about 4 or 5 centimeters wide, then took off her clothes, stood in front of the mirror, and wrapped the strip around her body as a chest wrapping cloth. She didn't put on her clothes again until she was sure that the outline of her body was no longer obvious because of the chest wrapping cloth. The boy in the mirror looked a little stronger than usual because of the chest wrapping cloth, and his back didn't look so thin. She glanced at a clear red mark extending from the back of her ear to her collarbone, and a trace of displeasure appeared in her eyes. Last night, the man in the sauna room only defended and didn't attack, but he was fast and accurate in the early stage and almost caught her neck several times. If he hadn't intended to do anything to her, she probably wouldn't have been able to escape last night. Seeing the red mark left by the man's attack, Feng Ling raised her lips coldly and covered the mark. At the same time, there seemed to be a lot of footsteps approaching outside. Standing in front of the mirror, Feng Ling paused and turned to look at the closed door. Outside the door, Nanheng casually glanced at the short and shabby old building behind the orphanage. Dean Lin hurriedly said, "This is the first building built when the orphanage was just established more than 30 years ago. It has been 30 years and looks a little shabby. There used to be a lot of children living here, but now the children have moved into the new building. It just used to pile up some sundries. It's dirty and messy inside, so no one usually comes here." Nanheng's eyes fell on the doors under the old building and saw that the bluestone paths outside the other doors were covered with moss. It was true that no one had entered for a long time, but there was no moss on the path closest to the main road here. Obviously, there were people walking there every day. He only glanced at the door and stopped in his tracks. The dean was slightly startled. Did young Master Li find something? He had never regretted so much that he agreed to let the police send Feng Ling to the orphanage. Although if Feng Ling didn't make trouble, even if young Master Li found out, he had promised in the morning that all the children had arrived. If young Master Li misunderstood that they deliberately hid someone, it would be a big misunderstanding. Suddenly, everyone saw Nanheng's footsteps approaching the door. There was no extra expression on his noble and handsome face, but there was only a sense of uneasiness. Feng Ling was already standing in the door. She vaguely heard footsteps approaching, and they were only separated by a door. Nanheng stood outside the door, leaned over, and looked at the bare bluestone path in front of the door. His cold voice was not clear whether he was talking to the people in the door or the people behind him. Is this the storeroom? How long has it been since anyone went in? Isn't this kind of place the most likely to give birth to all kinds of insects and unknown microorganisms? If something that you don't even know lives in there, don't scare those children. No, young Masterly, you're really funny. Occasionally, there are people in charge of the orphanage who go in to clean and tidy up, but we don't go in often. After all, there's too much dust inside. Dust is not a big deal. If the orphanage is understaffed, I don't mind asking my men to go in and tidy up for you. If there is something that shouldn't exist in there, it will be convenient to kill it. He said lightly, and his voice was so low and cold that only Feng Ling could hear the warning in his words. Feng Ling's face was cold and calm. It was not certain who would kill who. She put the dagger that she had just taken out from under the bed into her clothes with one hand and silently pressed the door with the other, ready to fight at any time. However, in this orphanage, her hostility had been greatly reduced. If the people outside the door didn't directly attack, she wouldn't rush out to make trouble. Listening to the voice of the man outside and the conversation between him and the director just now, it was not difficult to infer that the man in the sauna room last night was the legendary Li Nanheng of 11 Base. The director said a few more words outside, trying to explain how dirty and messy the sundries here were, and that they might fall down and hurt people at any time. Even if there were some things, they might be mice and cockroaches. There is no need for the people of 11 Base to make such a big deal out of it, for fear that they would be killed. It was better to ask the people in the orphanage to clean it up themselves. Through the door, Nanheng couldn't hear any movement inside, but with his experience, it was not difficult for him to hear that someone was standing in the door with his breath closed. Last night, he had seen the skills of the boy with his own eyes. The most basic means of self-protection, such as holding one's breath, should be very easy for him. As if because of the director's inexplicable explanation, Nanheng suddenly smiled, but his eyes were indifferent, as if he was going to directly punch a hole in the door. I haven't seen cockroaches and mice for many years. It's a pity that I can't see them. The director kept saying that he didn't want to dirty young Master Li's eyes, and then took the opportunity to ask others to point in another direction and invite young Master Li to visit. Feng Ling still held her breath inside the door. The person outside was silent for a moment and didn't say a word. She leaned against the door and heard the footsteps gradually fading away. Feng Ling turned around and looked out through the gap in the window next to her. When she saw the tall, but seemingly dangerous back, she slowly loosened her hand that had been holding the dagger in her clothes. The man didn't look as he did last night, when he was naked in the sauna room with a faint smile on his perfect upper body. The sunlight fell on his body and seemed to be plated with a layer of unreal golden light. The man's back was noble and cold. Just when Feng Ling was about to withdraw her gaze, he suddenly stopped and glanced back out of the corner of his eyes. She didn't know if he felt her gaze or something else, but he suddenly stopped and glanced back out of the corner of his eyes. Through the hidden gap in the window, Feng Ling instantly felt the man's gaze, which seemed to be full of coldness. She then looked at the group of 11 base subordinates and bodyguards in black suits behind him and instinctively felt that she had inadvertently provoked a big trouble dash. Chapter 744. The leaders and the director of the orphanage all breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, young Master Li didn't insist on going in. Otherwise, if Feng Ling did anything disrespectful inside, everyone would suffer with him. It was a false alarm. Only one leader turned around and walked back. He abruptly pushed open the door of Feng Ling's room and saw the slender and thin boy standing in front of the window. He frowned and said unhappily, "It seems that the amount of tranquilizers should be increased in the future. I shouldn't have left such a scourge like you in the orphanage. You are unsociable, indifferent, and don't get along well with others. People like you can't even survive in a place like the orphanage. I think you can only sit here and wait to die. You might as well go back to your wolf cave and continue to be an animal." After speaking, as if he had vented out all the panic he had felt just now, the hospital leader slammed the door angrily, turned around, and left. In the room, Feng Ling coldly looked out of the window at the person walking away. She raised her hand and glanced at the small red needle mark that would appear on her arm every day, and the corners of her mouth curled up coldly. Increase the amount of tranquilizers? She had endured it for a year. Did he really think she would be locked up here like a prisoner for the rest of her life? A year was enough for her body to develop natural antibodies to these tranquilizers, and she would gradually recover her strength every afternoon. As long as she wanted to leave, no one could stop her. Her hand paused slightly in her clothes, and she hid the dagger in her clothes again. At the same time, Feng Ling glanced at the sky outside the window, and the indifferent smile on her lips deepened. At night, the advanced military Hummer reflected a layer of cold light in the cold moonlight. After the screening of the orphanage, only 3 or 4 people passed the screening and could be taken back by the people of 11 Base for training. The training period was 2 months. If their physical fitness was not up to standard within 2 months, they would still be returned to the orphanage and would never be selected again. Seeing the cold and smooth Hummer leave in the night, the nervous mood of the group of people in the orphanage finally relaxed. At this moment, on the other side of the orphanage, a black figure nimbly flashed past, avoiding all the security guards and surveillance cameras in the orphanage. Since the security guards outside the wall were also at the main entrance today, it was rare for them to be negligent in their defense. He directly flipped over the wall and easily cut the wires of the anti-theft net on the top of the wall. After the power was cut, there was no current in the anti-theft net, so he could climb through it with his bare hands. When the figure successfully climbed over the high wall of the orphanage and quietly walked out in the darkness, everyone thought that the Hummerly non-hung was in had sped away, but the Hummer following him stopped a moment ago. "Boss, we found him. He's over there." The driver caught a glimpse of a figure jumping out from the wall of the orphanage. Li Nanheng opened his thin lips slightly and said indifferently, "Keep an eye on him. It seems like he's just trying to escape. He's currently heading towards the main road." The anti-theft net on the walls of the orphanage has a strong electric current. Ordinary people can't get through it all. This kid doesn't look old, but he's pretty good. He managed to get out safely without being discovered by the people inside. Nanheng didn't stop. He glanced at the direction where the boy escaped and signaled the driver to follow him with his eyes. The black Hummer had been lurking in the night for a long time. In an instant, it caught up with him, followed by the cars of several bodyguards. The people in the orphanage didn't know what had happened. 10 minutes later, there was a sudden exclamation from a security room of the orphanage. "What happened?" "The anti-theft net has been destroyed." In the distance, Feng Ling walked on foot. Hearing the sound of the car behind her, she had long guessed that Li Nanheng wouldn't let her go easily. She connected the wires she had just removed from the anti-theft net with the 2 batteries she had secretly carried in her arms. At the moment when the wires were connected at a certain angle, she suddenly threw the wires into the lawn and bushes behind her. In an instant, the wires fell among the flammable bushes. Sparks flew, and there was the sound of electric current. Then there was a sudden burst of flames and crackling noises, causing the black Hummer to stop abruptly before it was about to run over the bushes. Feng Ling took the opportunity to leave through a small road that no cars could pass through. She fled in the opposite direction of the other party's guests. Nanheng got out of the car, and his slender figure walked to the side of the bushes that were instantly ignited. He stood with one hand in his trouser pocket, wearing a black suit jacket that he didn't put on. He raised his cold black eyes to look at the figure that was quickly escaping, and a glimmer of interest appeared in his deep black eyes. The people in the car also rushed down, put out the fire in the bushes, and then sent people to continue to chase. However, half an hour later, they all returned without success. They didn't expect that as the training team of 11 Base, they had a 0 failure record in all kinds of tasks, but they were tricked by a teenager and couldn't even catch up with him. How was it possible? Who on earth was that boy? "Boss." A few of his men walked back with ugly expressions. "That kid's whereabouts are very strange. We've checked all the roads in front of us, but there's no trace of him. The remaining road is a dead end. In the distance is a high mountain jungle. There are wild tigers, wolves, jackals, and other beasts that can eat people alive at any time. The U.S. has never destroyed these natural jungles, nor will they send people in easily. It's full of danger. If that kid ran into that place, I'm afraid he won't be able to survive. Couldn't survive? Nanhung's sharp black eyes glanced in the direction of the jungle, and then glanced at the burnt wires that his men found in the bushes. That was obviously a ruthless little she-wolf. Any wire or battery could give her a chance to escape. Since she dared to break into the jungle, she must have the ability to survive. At this moment of escape, would you think of taking off the wires of the anti-theft net to protect yourself? As Nanhing said, his black military boots fiercely crushed the charred battery fluid on the ground. He looked down at the wires thrown on the ground, the bushes and the jungle in the distance, and his face was cold like the god of darkness. This kind of person at such a young age has such a sharp and decisive mind and skills. We can't let him go easily. If I can find him, he will either be used by me or killed by me. The men on the side looked solemn. For a moment, they couldn't resist the cold gaze in their boss's eyes. It seemed that the boss was already very dissatisfied that they failed to catch that boy. Chapter 745. Of course, wolves, tigers, and leopards in the jungle were no problem for Fengling. She grew up drinking wolf's milk, and the skills she learned to survive in the jungle caves before she was 5 years old were not for nothing. She could survive in front of a pack of wolves, and in the face of the great dangers in the jungle and the fighting between beasts, she had a perfect way to protect herself. Perhaps because she had drunk wolf's milk, she had a dangerous smell that only some animals could smell, so no one dared to approach her. It only took her 1/3 of the time of ordinary people to successfully escape from the other side of the jungle, and in case of being blocked outside, she simply swam away through the river in another direction. She finally got ashore, and her clothes were soaked. She could only pile firewood by the river and bake herself for a while. These survival methods in the jungle were so simple that she could find some food and daily necessities by herself in a few minutes. She didn't have any consciousness of being alone in the dark and dangerous, let alone the slightest fear. But she probably couldn't sleep tonight. After all, the group of people who took her in had been arrested, and she had lived in the orphanage for a year. Now the outside world was still strange to her, and she still didn't know how to live like a normal person. Li Nanheng also couldn't fall asleep. The man sat in the tall black Hummer, the window rolled down, and outside was the starlight above the jungle that was more brilliant than in the city. Several men outside the car were still looking for the trace of the boy, and they even waited at the exit of the jungle, where she should have chosen all night, but she didn't come out. The time of the people of 11 Base had always been precious. This time, they went to the orphanage designated by the Li family for business, but at this moment, they spent a lot of time here waiting for a teenage boy. Only Li Nanheng himself knew how precious the time they wasted was. His men walked to the side of the car and saw that boss was going to continue to wait and had no intention of leaving. Without young Master Li's permission, no one dared to stop looking for him. It was past 8 o'clock the next day, but there was not even a footprint on the road in the jungle that separated the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards. With one hand behind his back, Nanheng walked through the jungle expressionlessly. He glanced coldly at the higher bushes on the other side, which made it impossible to predict what was in the distance, then turned around and walked over. A few hundred meters behind the shrubs was a silent river. It wasn't very wide, but it was obviously very deep. What immediately attracted Nanheng's attention was a patch of grass on the other side of the river. There was a scorch mark there. Obviously, someone had been warming himself by the fire last night, but that person had already escaped once again. Nanheng took the unlit cigarette out of his mouth and looked coldly at the charred spot on the table across the river. He only said 2 words, "Very good." His voice was so cold that it made the underlings behind him shiver. They were all too clear about their boss's usual conduct and temper. It was most likely the first time that he, a proud son of heaven in the incomparably honorable Li clan, had been fooled by a stinking brat. Boss probably wanted to tear him apart right now. His men didn't even dare to breathe, silently praying for the brat who escaped from the orphanage, hoping that he wouldn't be caught by young Master Li in the future, or he would be killed directly. Go back to the orphanage to investigate his situation, Nan Hung said coldly. His men mistook the she as he. After all, except for Nan Hung, no one could have guessed that such a nimble and agile boy was actually an incredibly fair-skinned girl. His men quickly rushed back to the orphanage, but the result of the investigation was that even the people in the orphanage didn't know who the boy was. When he went back to explain to young Master Lee, his men coughed twice. The entire orphanage didn't know the specific situation of the boy. They only knew that he was a child rescued from the gangsters who were killed a year ago. He was used by the gangsters since he was a child and struggled to survive until he was a teenager. The police had some pity for him, so they sent him to the orphanage, but he never communicated with others and behaved in a way that made people wary of him. They were afraid that he would accidentally offend you, so they didn't let him show up with other children at the same time. Hearing this, Nan Heng's eyes turned cold. The subordinate said again, "Boss, the mafia that this kid was attached to has nothing to do with us. I didn't participate in the police's operation, so I can't directly investigate his situation. I don't think he has any feelings for the mafia, but he is really good at martial arts. The key is that no matter what he does, he is very fast. It's really unexpected. It was more than fast. It could be said that he was fast, ruthless, and accurate. A young girl, but she had the sharp nature and decisive decision-making ability of a jackal." Nan Hung sat quietly in the car, and the cigarette between his fingers was still not lit, but he seemed to be holding a bit of hostility between his fingers. It was rare for someone to escape under his nose. Then he got out of the car and looked down at the jungle in the distance, as if he was stepping on this big half of Los Angeles. Pay attention to the movements in Los Angeles in the next few days. She broke out of the orphanage alone. It won't be easy for her to survive. Nan Hung turned his head, and there was a cold light in his eyes. His men were stunned. "Shall we inform the police in various areas?" Nan Hung lit the cigarette, and the sparks between his fingers flickered. He narrowed his eyes coldly and said in a very indifferent voice, "No, people who are desperate will choose to walk into a trap." The black Hummer left the orphanage. When passing through the jungle, Nan Hung drove the car to the opposite side of the river. The scorch marks on the ground were still there. Just now, he didn't directly come to the opposite side of the river, but just looked at it from a distance. Now he took a closer look and saw a symbol made of a pile of fine small stones beside the scorched grass. This was a symbol that members of the mafia often used to provoke. Several men followed him, glanced at the ground from behind, and were instantly surprised. Shit! Boss Lee, who had always been a terror to the American underground mafia, was provoked by a teenage boy. He was clearly courting death. He looked up and saw that the temperature around Boss seemed to drop to the extreme in an instant. Nan Hung stared at the pile of symbols on the ground, strode over, and stared at the ground expressionlessly for a while. Suddenly, a sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth. It was not difficult to see that the soil under the pile of symbols was a little loose. It should be some mud mines that were common in the jungle, waiting for him to step forward to destroy the symbols and then explode him with smelly mud. Sure enough, he was courting death. Chapter 746. The sky brightened too quickly, and the sky darkened too quickly. In the night, Los Angeles was full of music. Feng Ling could clearly feel that she was out of tune with this world. She wasn't hungry. Last night, she had roasted a few fish by the riverbank. Normally, she didn't eat much and could at least last a day. But now that she was walking on the streets of Los Angeles and looking at all kinds of people, she suddenly realized that the environment she grew up in was not the same as here. If she wanted to survive, she had to either return to the jungle or go back to a place where the way of life was not much different from the way she lived in the past few years. But she knew very well how vicious the mafia was. She used to live for food, to survive, and to not be beaten. But now, which way should she go? Half a year later, in the mountains west of Los Angeles, several explosions and gunshots overlapped, startling the birds in the bushes to fly away. In the past 6 months, Feng Ling was used to looking for food in the woods at night, finding a shelter to live in, and going to the city during the day to find her own way out. Even if she was tired of eating those fish and small animals, she had no concept of robbing them. She even had no concept of money. Even if she robbed them, she could only buy food and didn't know what else to do, so she might as well find her own food to eat. In the morning, hearing the gunshots outside, Feng Ling opened her eyes and looked at the smoke that could be vaguely seen in the air not far away. This place was far from downtown Los Angeles, and the mafia often liked to find such a place to escape. The police often chose this place for military exercises, but the smoke did not look like a simple exercise. Someone was really making trouble here. Feng Ling smelled the obvious smell of gunpowder and followed the smell, but when she saw the blood in the bushes in the woods, she slowed down and looked around for footprints and movements around. Walking deep ahead, she suddenly noticed something. She was about to dodge to the side, but her foot was suddenly held by a blood-stained hand. Her face turned cold, and she abruptly lowered her head to look at the young man who had fallen in the bushes and was covered in blood. She then looked coldly at the hand that was holding her ankle, and the murderous intent in her eyes was obvious. "Don't go over, it's dangerous ahead." However, the man lying on the ground, covered in blood, said in a hoarse and weak voice. The killing intent in Feng Ling's eyes gradually dissipated. She glanced at his seriously injured appearance and easily shook his hand off. She did not speak and was about to move forward. "There is a small bomb that was recently buried 100 meters away." "Don't go over," the man said again, but his voice was very low because he was seriously injured and lost too much blood. Seeing the gun on his waist, she turned back and squatted down to take the gun. The young man, who was covered in blood, frowned and looked at her warily. He saw that she was young, but the temperature in her eyes was so cold that she seemed incompatible with this world. He frowned. "What are you doing?" "I will save you on the condition that you give this gun to me." Feng Ling's words were straightforward and cold. When the man frowned and was about to say something, she quickly picked up the gun at her waist and moved forward. Before the young man on the ground could see her steps clearly, she had jumped up the tree in the blink of an eye, avoided the bombs and mines lying in ambush on the ground, and rushed to the front smoothly. The young man was seriously injured, but the people of 11 Base had always had an established rule. As long as the gun was there, the person was there. 11 Base's bullets must not be used by any enemy or insignificant person. But he couldn't get up after a long time. About 10 minutes later, he vaguely heard a few gunshots, and then there was silence. Then there was the rustling of leaves being rubbed by clothes. He slowly opened his eyes weakly, and in a blur of blood, he saw the slender and thin teenager coming back. A pair of black boots, stained with mud and blood, stood in front of him. "Were you injured because you were ambushed?" Feng Ling asked. Seeing her come back, the man on the ground immediately answered, "Yes. Your gun is very useful. Give it to me." Feng Ling was not negotiating with him because she had already killed the lackeys who had set up the ambush. She thought this was the reward and price he should pay. The man on the ground also understood what she meant. Her request was not unreasonable, but 11 Base had its rules. He frowned and looked up at her again. "If you want my gun, that's fine, but our place has a rule. If you're not one of us, you can't use our guns. Otherwise, if I go back empty-handed, I'll be killed because I broke the rule. You've saved me, but you've also killed me." Feng Ling didn't quite understand his words, but she looked at the blood on his body and asked, "Can you still walk?" The man on the ground nodded. "I'm fine. I won't die. I just lost too much blood. I'll be fine after a few hours of rest." Feng Ling glanced at him coldly again. She didn't know the mark engraved under the butt of the gun in her hand, but only knew that this kind of gun was the most comfortable one she had ever seen in her life. For no reason, she was curious about the place this man mentioned. This big city was not suitable for her to live, and, as a normal person, she couldn't really go back to the jungle to live. She might as well go to the place he mentioned with the excuse of saving him. Feng Ling looked at the man on the ground and still asked in a flat tone, "What's your name?" "My name is Kay." The man on the ground swallowed the blood in his mouth, raised his head with some difficulty, looked at the cold-eyed boy, and smiled at her gratefully. "What about you? What's your name?" Feng Ling, when she was brought into 11 Base by Kay, Feng Ling felt that this place seemed to be a hidden military training base, but Kay took her into the base from the back road and the side, so she didn't see the sign 11 base at the front door. After she was officially taken in, she heard the conversation between Kay and the others and realized that this damn place turned out to be 11 base under Li Nanheng's charge. She almost regretted it. She planned to leave directly, but Kay invited her to stay with a sincere look, saying that he would introduce her to their boss Li, and kept praising her skills with the other bodyguards and brothers in front of the door. Many people were looking at her curiously. It was not difficult to see that these people were good at martial arts. She could escape with the moves she learned from childhood, but in front of so many people, she had no chance of winning. And in a place like 11 base, if she suddenly ran away for no reason, she might not be able to escape at all. "Hey, our boss is back." At this time, Kay suddenly patted her on the arm. Feng Ling turned her head and looked in the direction Kay pointed, only to see that the tall black Hummer she had successfully avoided half a year ago were driving in this direction. Dash. Chapter 747. Enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. This was probably it. At this moment, Feng Ling could only be glad that he didn't see her face in the sauna room, but this was obviously not an easy way to avoid the problem. Seeing that Li Nanheng's car had driven in, Kay took Feng Ling's wrist and was about to walk over, but as soon as his hand touched her wrist, he was abruptly flung away. Kay paused and looked back at her. Seeing Feng Ling's expressionless face, he smiled awkwardly. "Sorry, I forgot that you don't like to be touched." In fact, Kay was only 18 years old, only 5 years older than Feng Ling, but he was still a bit hot-headed. Although Feng Ling was young, her character was calm, mature, and indifferent, making it hard for people to see through her. Feng Ling didn't speak, but glanced coldly at the black Hummer over there and said indifferently, "Your base is not suitable for me. I don't want a gun. Keep it for yourself. I'll leave later." "Where are you going?" "Thank you for not only saving my life, but also cleaning the wound on my back in the past 2 days. You are my great benefactor. Didn't you say you don't have a place to live outside? Since you are so good at martial arts, why don't you stay in our 11 base in the future?" As Kay spoke, he quietly leaned close to her ear and whispered to the cold-eyed boy, "Let me tell you, not everyone can enter our 11 base, but with your martial arts skills, you can definitely enter. Besides, you have saved me. I just need to tell the drill master. Also, recently our boss has something to deal with at home and can't often stay in a base, so the drill master will be in charge of the recruitment for the time being. Although our boss is not easy to deal with, the drill master can handle it. Don't worry, he will definitely let you stay." Feng Ling, she didn't want to stay, but there were people with good martial arts skills around, so she stood there quietly and didn't speak. "Our boss has got off. Do you want to see him?" Kay asked. "No." It was a very cold word. His voice was so cold that Kay couldn't help but take another look at him. However, Feng Ling remained expressionless from beginning to end, making it impossible for anyone to see through her thoughts. Because the black Hummer had stopped, many brothers had gone over to say hello, but Feng Ling had no intention of approaching it. She turned to the back of the crowd, crossed her arms over her chest, looked silently at the car surrounded by people, and thought for a while. 11 Base was indeed the most powerful military training base in the United States. It had connections with both the underworld and the underworld. No one dared to provoke it, and the drill masters and trainers here were said to be top-notch. This kind of place was obviously suitable for her. That was if they were willing to accept her. If Li Nanheng didn't notice that she was the one in the orphanage, she could stay. Besides, there were so many people in 11 Base. There were hundreds of people in the base, and there were also many people who had finished their military service and were working in various police stations in the United States. It seemed impossible for a high and mighty person like him to notice a small character like her. He chased her outside the orphanage because she accidentally saw him taking a bath. Not only that, but also that kind of naked. And because he found out that she was a woman, he probably couldn't bear it. The subsequent chase was probably because of his unwillingness and her provocation. There was no deep hatred or entanglement, so he didn't seem to have any need to pay attention to her. In the end, Feng Ling saw Kay standing in place and didn't go over, so she glanced at him. Isn't that your boss? Why don't you go over? In fact, our boss is very cold and bad-tempered, but he has outstanding military exploits, and no one in the whole base can beat him. Many brothers are particularly enthusiastic to him because of their admiration for him, but boss basically doesn't talk to them. Kay coughed and smiled awkwardly. I wanted to go over and say hello, but after all, you are here, and I brought you here, so I can't leave you alone. Besides, even if I go over now, I'm afraid that boss will only give me a cold look. My skills and ability haven't reached the level where boss will take me seriously, and I really can't expect to be seen by boss, so it's meaningless to force my way over. Feng Ling glanced at Kay. You are actually good at martial arts, but you still need time. Kay immediately glanced at her. How old are you? Do you think I need time? What about you? Feng Ling coldly smiled. 13 years old, but I lived in the jungle from the age of 1, fought with birds and beasts, and learned how to protect myself. While I was 5 years old, I began to learn how to shoot. Do you have to discuss age with me? Kay. He entered 11 base at the age of 15 and had only received training for 3 years. No wonder the gap between them was so big. Not far away, when Nan Hung got out of the car, the people around him were sensitive to the fact that the atmosphere around Boss seemed to have reached a freezing point. Many people knew that although Boss was the eldest son of the Lee family, he didn't have much contact with his family. Recently, he suddenly returned to the Lee family. No one knew why, and no one could guess. However, at this moment, looking at Boss's expression, they knew that the atmosphere and temperature in the base would probably be low for a while. At this moment, the man who had just gotten out of the car caught a glimpse of 2 figures in the distance from the corner of his eye. When he saw Kay, his face was expressionless, but he suddenly paused for a second and looked over again. The man who looked like an emperor suddenly tilted his head, and a faint light flashed across his deep eyes. Everyone turned to look in that direction as well. Boss, the man raised his hand and motioned them to shut up. This gesture made the surrounding people quiet down in an instant. It should be known that Boss would only say a few words to the people in the base when they were strengthening their training. Many newcomers and semi-newcomers who were still in training could rarely get Boss's special attention. Even many senior members with outstanding military achievements might not have the opportunity to get too close to Boss. Boss, who seemed indifferent to everything, seemed to be attracted at this moment. Who was that person? Of course, Kay and the others recognized him, but the boy behind Kay looked young. His short black hair was soft and just reached the length of the back of his ears. Even when Li Nanheng's cold eyes met him, he was still lazy and indifferent without any superfluous reaction. This boy's figure looked very familiar from a distance. Chapter 748. Even when the man approached, Feng Ling still stood still and didn't look away. But Kay was shocked that Boss suddenly came over and his attention seemed to be on Feng Ling. He immediately said with a flattered or conflicted expression, Boss. Li Nanheng didn't respond. He just looked at Feng Ling and his eyes darkened. His thin lips curved coldly and he spat out a string of cold words. When did the base become a sightseeing place for strangers? Who are you? Do you know where this place is? Looking at the obvious inquiry in Li Nanheng's indifferent eyes, Feng Ling guessed that he should feel that her figure was familiar, but after all, he had never seen any part of her above the neck. Besides, she was wrapped in a chest cloth and looked a little stronger. He must be just suspicious, but not sure. But from his eyes, for the first time in her life, Feng Ling had a feeling that her hair stood on end. Even when she was surrounded by the police and faced with dozens of guns a year and a half ago, she didn't have such an inexplicable feeling of guilt. If it weren't for the fact that she was wearing clothes and the chest cloth, she would have suspected that the boss of 11 Base had recognized her at a glance. But when she thought about it carefully, she realized that they had only met once in the sauna room, and they had been fighting all the time. The steam in the sauna room was so misty that she couldn't even see his naked lower body through the mist. How could he see her clearly? Besides, it had been half a year. But this man's keenness did make her feel very dangerous. Feng Ling smiled coldly. It seems that next time I save people, I should be more careful lest I accidentally save people of 11 Base and be inexplicably labeled as tourists after being invited in. Hearing her words, Nanheng took a look at Kane next to him. Hearing her words, Nanheng took a look at Kay, who hurriedly nodded. Yes, boss, little brother Feng Ling saved my life. I was ambushed at the foot of Mount Veros and almost died in those people's hands. Little brother Feng Ling saved my life. I saw that he was good at martial arts, and his age was just right for the new recruits in the base this year. Besides, he had nowhere to go, so I let him follow me back to the base. I wanted to tell the drill master about it, but I didn't expect that boss would suddenly. Kay saw that Nanheng's expression was so cold that it almost froze him to death. As he spoke, he didn't know what he had said wrong, but boss's expression was obviously not warm at all. Instead, it was so cold that it made people panic. 11 Base is famous. I'm really lucky to be able to stand here. She needed to find a way out for herself, but it could not be a dangerous way out. She also needed to find an opportunity. Nanheng looked at her with his deep eyes and did not speak immediately. Feng Ling was not in a hurry. Standing in front of him, her posture was even more standard than those members who had been trained in the base for a year. After about a few seconds, the man finally said coldly, "Being able to fight doesn't mean that you have martial arts skills, and having martial arts skills doesn't mean that you can stay in 11 Base. Since you are the savior of the base members, I'll give you this opportunity. Wait for me at the training ground tonight. Let's talk if you can survive 3 moves from me." His commanding tone didn't have the slightest bit of warmth. It was cold. Feng Ling raised her eyebrows slightly and did not say much, which meant that she accepted it, but Kay was as excited as if something was wrong. When Li Nanheng turned to leave expressionlessly, Feng Ling stood in the same place and curved her thin lips arrogantly. As expected, he was suspicious of her. First, he wanted to test her martial arts skills, see her moves, and then what? She had heard from a few Chinese people in the mafia that since she planned to stay in 11 Base, she would take it one step at a time and try to stay as long as she could. The fact that she was a woman must continue to be covered up. Otherwise, there would be no woman left in this kind of place. Besides, the fact that she had seen Nanheng's naked body would probably be the reason for him to drive her out. In fact, she didn't see it clearly at that time. Feng Ling inexplicably felt that she had suffered a big loss. She didn't see anything clearly and was still being chased. Wasn't she wronged? Kay found a temporary place for Feng Ling, which was the bed in his room. The bed was divided into upper and lower bunks, just like the normal training troops. The only difference was that many troops in China would have at least 8 people in a room, but here there were only 2 people in a room at most. The lower bunk of Kay's room was sent out on a mission last month, and he was still in Africa, so Feng Ling could live here temporarily. It was getting dark. After answering the drill master's call, Kay walked out, leaving the room to Feng Ling alone. After making sure that he would not come back for the time being, Feng Ling locked the door, picked up the black combat suit that Kay had just given her, and went straight into the bathroom. It wouldn't be too late to take a shower before fighting. After taking a shower, Feng Ling changed into the black suit. Kay said that he had worn this combat suit when he first came to the base 3 years ago. At that time, he was only 15 years old, but boys at this age grew too fast. In less than half a year, this suit became too small, so now it didn't look very old and was only a little bit bigger for her to wear. And this little bit bigger was great for Feng Ling. A slightly loose suit was suitable for hiding her figure. Before coming to 11 Base, Kay gave her a sum of money to thank her, saying that her clothes were too old and wanted her to buy a few sets of clothes to wear, but Feng Ling didn't buy them. Instead, she bought a few pieces of cloth suitable for wrapping breasts and made them into more effective breast wrappings. Now she wrapped the breast wrappings around her body, which no longer felt stuffy and airless, and could be wrapped around a few more times to hide her figure better. On the other side, after returning to the base, Nanheng had a simple meeting with several drill masters in the base, and then stood in front of the window on the 2nd floor behind the base. The subordinate who had just come in stood behind him, not daring to speak or disturb Boss, but his eyes still couldn't help looking at him. He didn't know why Boss was even more depressed than usual after returning from the Leaf family this time. Could it be that the elders of the Leaf family had done something shocking to anger Boss again? Although Boss was a godlike existence in the base, after all, he was still a junior in the Lee family. The elders of their family had all led soldiers to fight in wars and had great power in the military, but when they taught their children a lesson, they either swung a cane or directly whipped them with a belt. Tut, tut, he didn't dare to imagine that scene. But what was going on with Boss today? Why did he keep looking in the direction of the training ground expressionlessly? Chapter 749. When it was getting dark, Nan Hung had already gone to the training ground alone. Probably because he had nowhere to vent his anger after coming back from the Lee family. He was worried that there was no one to beat, and probably wanted to see the true face of that boy. In short, in the eyes of many members of the base, Boss, who had never cared about anything, actually took the initiative to go to the training ground to test a newcomer. The point was that Boss was waiting for him. He's not here yet. Nan Hung glanced at Kay, who was passing by, and asked. Kay paused. He didn't expect that Boss would take the initiative to ask him. He immediately stopped and replied, I just went to the drill master's place to get something. Feng Ling probably took a bath and changed his clothes because he was about to compete with you. Haha, life should have some sense of ceremony. I feel that he attaches great importance to you, but I think he should have finished packing up by now. However, no matter how Kay laughed, Feng Ling still didn't appear until the sky was completely dark. Nan Hung, who had waited on the training ground for more than half an hour, looked as cold as frost. The group of base members around couldn't help sighing in their hearts. He actually dared to let Boss Lee's brother go. Did he know how to write the word death? Although Nan Hung looked angry, he had nothing else to do tonight, so he was not in a hurry. He randomly picked a few members to fight, but after a few rounds, they all fell to the ground crying and begging for mercy. Usually, the drill master wouldn't beat these people too hard. After all, many of them had just joined the base and needed more actual combat training and basic training. It would take at least 5 or 8 years to pass the training. But Nan Hung obviously didn't intend to show mercy. When these young members were called to the training ground, they knew this would happen, but they didn't expect that in the end, they really fell to the ground and couldn't get up. Looking at these useless newcomers, Nan Hung was expressionless and didn't fight anymore. He just glanced at the darkening sky. Boss, was he still going to wait for that boy so late at night? Who on earth was that boy? The group of people couldn't help looking at Kay. Kay was also dumbfounded. Finally, in the darkness of the night, a slender black figure came over under the cold moonlight. When she walked to the training ground, Feng Ling glanced at the newcomers who were scrambling to stand up on the ground, and then turned to look at the man who was surrounded by the words, not to be trifled with. After her shower, she had been waiting for her hair to dry. This place was full of men, and there was not even a hairdryer. Even if there was one, she did not know how to use it. After all, she had never used it before. At this moment, the wind blew through her soft, black hair. Under the moonlight, the young man had a face that was difficult to distinguish between a man and a woman. Although the black uniform on her body was slightly loose, she was so handsome that many people couldn't help but point at her. She was only 13 years old, but she already had an indescribable allure and charm. Oh my God, I didn't take a good look at him in the afternoon. The boy you brought is quite handsome. Is he sure he's a man? Why is her skin so soft and tender? Don't tell me he's a girl? Hearing the word girl, Feng Ling looked directly at the person who spoke. Her expression remained unchanged, but the corners of her mouth curved charmingly and coldly. Girl, you're only 13 years old and haven't even reached the age of puberty yet. Do you want to try my fist first? Hearing that he said he was 13 years old and directly provoked him, the other party, who had been here for 3 years like Kay, didn't believe that he couldn't beat such an untrained little boy, so he readily accepted the challenge. Nan Hung didn't speak and just let them fight. However, the man had just stepped onto the training ground. In the blink of an eye, before the group of people could see Feng Ling's movements clearly, the man was already lying on the ground, and his back was stepped on by Feng Ling. However, because it was just a casual kick, Feng Ling didn't hurt him. She just made the man hurt a little, withdrew her foot, took a step back, and said with clear eyes, "Do you want to continue fighting? You can't even beat a girl, okay?" The man's face turned livid with anger, but he was really convinced. After all, this boy's attack speed was so fast that it surprised him. He said a few words to resolve the embarrassment and fled in the laughter of the group of brothers. Kay secretly gave her a thumbs up from below, and then he turned his head to the brothers beside him and kept bragging about how Feng Ling saved him that day. The group of people were stunned and felt that this 13-year-old boy was almost deified, but just now his attack speed was really amazing. Feng Ling's speed was an instinct that she had trained since she was a child in a wolf pack. This was indeed a speed that some people might not be able to achieve even if they trained for decades. This was also the key to her unexpected victory, even though she hadn't received formal strict training. Nan Heng just looked at her and didn't speak. When Feng Ling looked at him under the cold moonlight, this was the first time that Feng Ling saw the man's face clearly since that time in the sauna room. Although she had seen his face at that time, it was still a bit blurred in the water vapor, and then she covered her face with a towel. The man in front of her had pitch-black eyes that were deep and bewitching. His handsome face was slightly more robust, but it just so happened that his facial features were just right. When he looked at her, his gaze was cold, as if he could penetrate her entire body in an instant. "You do have some skills." The man looked serious, and his tone was so flat that no one could hear his emotions. There was no smile on his cold face. Feng Ling glanced at him and smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "What? The legendary boss, Li, has stage fright? Are you afraid of losing face in front of your group of men?" Hearing this, Nan Heng's originally cold black eyes suddenly lit up with a frightening cold flame. The group of members around couldn't help holding their breath and didn't dare to say a word. This boy was really King courageous. The group of members who had planned to go back to take a shower and go to bed early because they still had to get up early tomorrow morning for training didn't plan to leave. They wanted to stand here and watch how he would die in the hands of Boss. Watching Boss Li being provoked by a brat was much more interesting than watching the other brothers fall into the mud again and again during training. However, just when everyone didn't know what Boss planned to say or do, Nan Heng suddenly made a move. Feng Ling's reaction was also very fast. At the moment when he attacked, she dodged and responded with a move. However, Nan Heng's speed from attacking her lower body to changing his target was so fast that even Feng Ling didn't expect it. His eyes suddenly changed, and when she realized it, the man's hand had already attacked her upper body and directly hit her chest. Chapter 750. Shit, what's Boss's move? Directly attacking her chest? I've never seen him make such a sinister move before. The voices around the training ground couldn't be heard by the two of them. Feng Ling's chest was heavily padded. She paused and couldn't help but step back several steps, but her expression didn't change at all, and she continued to fight back. After all, she hadn't received any strict and precise training. All her moves were based on instinct and some punches and kicks she learned from Mafia. She was fast, but in the face of Nan Heng's very routine and occasionally changing fighting style, although she could withstand 3 or 4 moves, his moves became faster and faster, and then he hit her chest again and again. Although Feng Ling knew it, she still felt a little uneasy after being attacked. For a moment, she had to stagger back several steps. When she steadied herself, Nan Heng looked at her with a much colder expression. It wasn't her. Although they looked similar, most of them were about the same height at the age of 13 or 14. After confirming that the boy in front of him was not the fearless girl in the orphanage a month ago, Nan Heng no longer probed, but used all his strength and didn't treat her as a newcomer at all. Feng Ling knew what he meant. After being hit a few times, she became smart and only defended. After all, her speed was still fast. If she kept dodging, Nan Heng could only hit her shoulder in 10 moves, but if she wanted to hurt Nan Heng with a counterattack, she might have to train for at least another 10 years. It was just a test, and it could be counted as half of the competition. Feng Ling knew what real strength was. She calmed herself down and accepted the challenge. In the end, Nan Heng's fist almost landed on her face. Just as she was about to take the blow, a gust of cold wind swept past her eyes, and the man's hand stopped precisely an inch away from her face. She raised her eyes to look at him, and Nan Heng also glanced at her coldly without expression. Obviously, he was a little disappointed with her skills, but at least compared with other newcomers, Feng Ling was much stronger. Nan Hung withdrew his hand, turned around, and left without saying a word. The group of people who were carried down were about to clap and cheer for this exciting fight, but they were also afraid that their boss would sweep through them in a fit of rage. If that happened, they would all suffer a calamity. They resisted the urge to applaud, but when they saw their boss turn around and leave, the group of people stood on the spot, confused. They didn't know what their boss was planning. Was he going to keep this guy or not? Feng Ling stood on the training ground and raised her hand to press the slightly painful part of her chest. The reason it hurt was because Nan Hung had hit her chest several times. Others might not have seen it, but she clearly knew that he was testing whether she was a woman or not. Fortunately, the breast wrapping cloth he was using now was stronger and thicker. She was only 13 years old. Even if her breasts were well developed, they were not fully developed yet. Being tightly wrapped by the breast wrapping cloth, he basically couldn't feel anything when he patted her. Compared with what he saw with his new eyes in the sauna room that day, it was certainly not the feeling he had imagined. Just this point alone was enough to dispel half of his suspicions about her. Boss, a man who was not afraid of death, was too curious. He chased after Nan Hung and asked, "That guy named Feng Ling, are we going to keep him or not? I think he is very arrogant at such a young age. Why don't we just keep him and let him hone himself in our base? I think in a few years, his edges and corners will be smoothed out." Li Nanhung didn't look back and said indifferently, "Since you like to hone yourself so much, let him stay. Throw him to the drill master of your Team 3 and let him hone himself." Throw him to their Team 3? That was to say, if that boy entered the training camp of their Team 3 in the future, the drill master would often ask Feng Ling to stand out and compete with them. Wasn't this just asking for trouble? That Feng Ling was just defeated by Boss Li. If it were all the newcomers in this base, who could be his opponent? Ahem, boss. The man followed up reluctantly and asked in a gossipy tone, "Why did you keep hitting that boy's chest? Could it be?" In the past, they often heard that Boss Li was not close to women. Even if the Li family arranged beautiful girls for him, he didn't even bother to look at them. Some people even suspected that Boss Li's sexual orientation was abnormal and feared that he would lose his virginity in the base. Later, they found that they thought too much. Boss Li was probably not interested in men or women because he really didn't want to be close to anyone. Nanhing glanced at him coldly and slowly said, "I'm not interested in men. If you say one more word, I'll run 50 laps around the base tomorrow." The man behind him instantly turned pale and ran away as if his feet were smeared with oil. The next day, in the breakfast cafeteria of 11 Base, Nanhung, who rarely came to the base cafeteria to eat, rarely appeared in everyone's sight. However, the group of rookies and semi-rookies who had personally watched the exciting match last night still had shock in their eyes that they had not digested after the whole night. Someone still whispered, "Hey, do you think Boss really likes men? Last night, Boss really hit that kid's chest directly. It's obvious that he was taking advantage of him." Even if the whispers of the group of people were too low, Nanhung could still hear them. A drill master sitting opposite him didn't dare to say a word but still glanced at him. Nanhung didn't respond. After eating, he threw the tableware heavily on the table and snorted coldly. Then he said coldly to the drill master of Team 3 sitting opposite him, "Kick the boy named Feng Ling who was assigned to your team last night out of your team." The drill master of Team 3. He was just assigned to his team last night, and it had been less than 10 hours since then. How could he kick him out? Then he heard the expressionless Boss Li said coldly, "Send him to my team. I'll deal with him myself." The drill master of Team 3 and the other drill masters, Feng Ling was taken to the base cafeteria by K early in the morning. Although 11 Base was a training ground, it occupied a very large area. Even the so-called base cafeteria was larger than the general restaurants outside, and the dining facilities were also very good. Feng Ling had never experienced such treatment. As soon as she walked in with Kay, she saw Nanhung coming out with an unkind look. However, even though she saw him, Feng Ling was still hesitating whether she should greet Boss, but Boss Li just coldly passed her by. Chapter 751. When Feng Ling learned that she was suddenly transferred from Team 3 to Team 1, and that the drill master of Team 1 was Li Nanheng himself, she remained expressionless. Kay said that those who could enter Team 1 were all rookies with excellent martial arts skills. Ordinary rookies couldn't enter Team 1 at all. Usually, whenever there was a mission, Team 1 would be the first to be selected because Team 1 was the most skilled group in the entire base and was the most admired training camp in the base. Because most of the members of Team 1 had grown up, even without Boss Lee's personal supervision, the members of Team 1 would train consciously every day and Boss Lee didn't need to worry about them at all. Many people in 11 Base had different opinions about Feng Ling's sudden transfer to Team 1. Some people thought that Feng Ling was lucky to be discovered by Boss with her little martial arts skills. She was able to sneak into Team 1 as soon as she entered the base and get such a good opportunity, while some people thought that Boss was clearly making things difficult for her. The members of Team 1 were all like wolves and tigers. When they trained, they all worked hard. When they went out on missions, they dared to put their lives on the line. If such a 13-year-old boy was brought into Team 1, he would probably die in the training camp within half a month. However, in the face of all kinds of curiosity, comments, and concerns from this group of new people, Feng Ling didn't think much of it. Since she had decided to settle down in 11 Base, it didn't matter where she lived. Anyway, as long as she could train, learn marksmanship, and all kinds of things she liked, as long as she had a place to live and food to eat, this was the life she wanted. On the first night after being transferred to Team 1, Feng Ling didn't have the consciousness to live there directly and still slept in the lower bunk of Kay's room. Kay gave her an old cell phone that he had used before and said that in the future, as long as she had a chance to go on a mission in Team 1, she would get a lot of bonuses if she succeeded, so she didn't have to worry about buying new things. If it was a special big mission that might require her to risk her life, as long as she could complete the mission and come back alive, the bonus was enough for her to buy a small house in the suburbs of Los Angeles. It could be seen that although the members of 11 Base only wore ordinary uniforms, they were actually very rich and powerful. That night, Feng Ling fell asleep at Kay's place. It was rare for Nanheng to take a look at the training camp at night. The members of Team 1 were surprised that their boss actually had the time to come today. Usually, they trained by themselves, or the deputy drill master would do it for them. Their boss was always elusive, only appearing during the assessment, but tonight he actually showed up. In the training camp, the man flickered the cigarette between his fingers. He glanced at the familiar faces in the crowd and glanced at the person in charge of the training camp. He asked if the newcomer had come today, but the answer he got was that the newcomer would come tomorrow morning and would not come tonight. Nanheng threw the cigarette, but onto the ground and stepped on it to extinguish it. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the people in the field, his gaze turning cold inch by inch. He was transferred to Team 1, an honor that all the members of the base dreamed of, but he didn't come in time, and he said he would come back tomorrow. Very good. It was probably because he was too good-tempered. It was rare for him to find a newcomer who could catch his eye, so he wanted to promote him. Since you don't know what's good for you, don't blame me for being impolite. The next day, why does Boss's face look worse today? Last night, the light in Boss's room seemed to be on. Did he not sleep last night? How could it be? Did Boss suffer from insomnia? Of course he suffered from insomnia. Nanheng felt that it was probably because he had been with this group of men in the base for too long that he was particularly sensitive to women. He had just seen them in the sauna room of the orphanage that night half a year ago, and they were a pair of little buns that had just developed. It was obviously a teenage girl who had broken in, but he still couldn't stop thinking about them. He didn't know whether it was because of the pair of little white buns that loomed beside the clothes that he had seen, or because he couldn't forget the guy who dared to burn the wires in the bushes, spend the night in the jungle, and dare to provoke him with signals. However, as soon as he closed his eyes and fell asleep at night, the scene he saw in the sauna room when he tore off the other party's sleeves jumped out in his mind. The key was that in the dream, the other party's face suddenly turned into Feng Ling's emotionless face from time to time. They looked quite compatible, both with the same soft and tender skin. It was because of this strange dream that their heads and bodies were put together that Nanheng suddenly woke up and couldn't sleep all night. It was not until dawn that he barely slept for an hour. When he woke up in the morning, his face was as bad as if a can of Swedish herring had been splashed on his face, which was unbearable to look at. Nanheng walked out of the training camp, wearing a tight-fitting black t-shirt under his black combat uniform. His neat short hair made him look arrogant and lazy in this casual and sleepy state. He was so cold and cool that it instantly silenced all the discussions around him, not daring to make any more rash comments. "Boss, you didn't sleep well last night, did you?" Han Jin, the deputy drill master of Team 1, followed behind and asked. Nanheng didn't answer him but glanced coldly at the members of the training camp behind him, lit a cigarette, put it in his mouth, narrowed his eyes, and said coldly, "Is that boy here? You mean Feng Ling? He arrived an hour ago and said he would arrive this morning." As expected, he was on time. In the morning, when we were just preparing for training, he came in. He just ran a few laps with everyone and is now learning to do other training in the back, Han Jin answered truthfully. He was a man of his word. But damn, why did he dream of that brat in the middle of the night? Li Nanheng's face darkened. Although that boy named Feng Ling is young, he is a newcomer after all. I think his moves are ruthless and fast. Give him intensive training. If he can't keep up, let him practice overnight. If his movements are not up to standard, beat him with a stick. Don't consider whether he is a newcomer or not. Han Jin stood behind and thought for a while, saying silently, "It can be seen that he hasn't received professional training, but he is very quick-witted. With a little guidance, he can do very standard movements. He has only been here for an hour, but he has learned several good movements with good strength. I don't think we should use a stick to beat him for the time being." Nanheng, with a cigarette in his mouth, suddenly turned to look at Han Jin, expressionless. As soon as he saw the fiery look in Boss's eyes, Han Jin instantly understood. "Okay, I see. Give him the most intensive training. If he can't keep up, use a stick. If he doesn't cry for his mom and dad, you can revoke my title of Deputy Drill Master at any time." Chapter 752. In the afternoon, Nanheng inspected the training of several teams and was about to go to Team 1, but he paused and looked down at his clothes. There were several good newcomers in other training camps who were splashed with some muddy water, but it had already dried up and was not obvious. Usually, everyone in the base was a man, and no one would be so clean that they would even care about this bit of muddy water. Even Nanheng, who was a little obsessed with cleanliness, was gradually assimilated by this group of careless people. "Boss, there's only one team left in today's inspection. Aren't we going?" Xiao Su, who was following behind, was about to finish his service and would soon be assigned to work in the Los Angeles Police Department. He was agile and had always been valued by Nanheng. He had been in the base for some years and did everything neatly. In the months before he was about to leave, in order to practice his ability, he often followed Nanheng. Nanheng didn't answer, but coldly glanced at his clothes again. Instead of going directly to the training camp of Team 1, he turned back to his residence. "Go get me a set of clothes. I'll go after I change." Xiao Su was a little stunned and didn't know how to react. No matter how much Boss liked to be clean, he wouldn't suddenly change clothes after walking around several training camps. What was going on? However, Xiao Su was a straightforward person. He didn't ask any superfluous questions and directly went to bring Nanheng's custom-made black combat uniform into his room. Nanheng went back and took a simple shower. The tiredness from not sleeping well last night had been washed away. He casually combed his neat short black hair, took the clothes that Xiao Su handed over, glanced at them, and put them on. Xiao Su knew that Boss usually didn't like to wear suits. Instead, he liked to wear the same black uniform as everyone else. Other, slightly more formal clothes would only be worn when leaving the base or returning to the Lee family, but Boss Lee would never be too stiff. Even if it was a suit worth millions of yuan, he could still look like a military ruffian. In this black uniform, even if it was the same clothes, standing in the crowd, the cold and cool man was an unforgettable scenery. This was said by Xiao Su's sister when she came here to visit 2 years ago. His sister accidentally saw Boss and began to miss him in her heart. Her mouth was full of all kinds of admiration for Boss Lee, and she couldn't suppress it even if she wanted to. The man buttoned up the buttons on his uniform one by one and said coldly, "Go to Team 1. Xiao Su paused for a moment. He remembered that Boss had purposely taken a bath and changed his clothes so that he could join Team 1 later. But the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. At the same time, the daily routine special training of Team 1, which began early in the morning, was almost over. Feng Ling was a newcomer and the youngest. She was not as tall as the men in the team, who were already 1'8" or 1'9" meters tall, so she was arranged to be in the first row. Originally, many members of Team 1 were not too happy with this rookie who was too young. This was because no rookie had ever directly entered Team 1. They had to go through strict screening and competition before they could enter. They could be kicked to another team at any time to be retrained, but this kid had entered Team 1 as soon as he arrived. However, in this half a day of training, Feng Ling learned every training and competition very quickly as long as he watched how others did it. A series of training tasks and movements were very standard. Even if he was not familiar with it the first time, he would be surprised when he did it the second time. It could be said that no one could find any fault with him. As a result, in these few hours, the unwillingness in most people's hearts gradually diminished. Besides, Feng Ling was young, thin, and didn't have a cheeky smile that was annoying. Most importantly, he was also good-looking. His soft and tender skin made people inexplicably want to protect him. In addition, he wasn't the kind of trash who was too weak to stay in Team 1. In just a few hours, he had gradually been accepted by the members of Team 1, and they had no intention of excluding him at all. This really put Deputy Drill Master Han Jin in a difficult position. On the one hand, he had been trying to catch Feng Ling's weakness and punish him. Otherwise, he couldn't explain to Boss Lee, but this boy didn't make any mistakes at all. In front of so many members, he had to be clear about the reward and punishment, so he was very anxious. After a few hours, Feng Ling was accepted by everyone, but he was so angry that he got a big pimple on his chin. The day's training was almost over. At this time, most of the members were very excited and had planned their schedule in the base in the afternoon. Feng Ling was no exception. As soon as she entered the base, she changed her residence twice within 2 days. She also needed to make a good arrangement for her new residence in Team 1. The deputy drill master hadn't told her where she lived, so she had to interrogate him after a while. At the same time, at the passageway outside the training camp, a tall man in a black uniform strolled over. His cold and cool face was calm and indifferent. He stood at the entrance of the training camp like a ferocious tiger, looking at the group of members who were training. The man just stood there quietly, but his aura was enough to frighten people. The members who were a little slack because the training was coming to an end immediately stood as straight as a tree, and their expressions were very serious. But even so, Feng Ling was still not affected at all. She maintained the same action and expression from the beginning without any neglect, which was why the deputy drill master couldn't find any fault with her. This little boy was really too serious. Two people behind Feng Ling moved their mouths slightly and whispered, "Boss Lee usually doesn't see him even once in half a month. What's wrong with him today? He comes quite frequently. Is there any important task that he needs to tell us in advance? It's possible. Otherwise, Boss usually doesn't come here." No matter how these people were curious and talking in their hearts, Li Nanheng still stood at the entrance of the training camp, looking calmly at them who were in the training ground. The man was tall and had long legs, a high-nosed bridge, and a cold and handsome face. If it weren't for the fact that his expression was so cold and indifferent, he could be described as a famous painting from ancient times. Xiao Su, who followed behind Li Nanheng, couldn't help glancing at the group of people and then at the relatively thin Feng Ling standing in the first row of the team. He thought that no matter how much Boss cherished talents and took special care of members with potential, this Feng Ling shouldn't be so amazing that Boss could change so inexplicably today. He was probably just thinking too much. Chapter 753. Li Nanheng looked at them until the training was over and the team members were dismissed. The man's dark eyes swept across the crowd and finally fixed on Feng Ling. Feng Ling didn't seem to see him and went straight to Han Jin. "Deputy Drill Master, where should I live in the future?" Han Jin paused, hesitated, and remembered that the base members of Team 1 usually lived in the buildings behind. He was about to make a phone call to ask which room had a bed when he suddenly caught a glimpse of Li Nanheng coming over. "Boss!" Han Jin quickly turned to look at Li Nanheng. Nanheng didn't respond, but when he approached, he tilted his head and lit a cigarette. He put his hand casually in his trouser pocket and held the cigarette in his mouth. The smoke lingered in front of his cold face, and his neat black hair was a little messy due to the wind, which added a bit of wildness to him. His handsome profile was like that of the ancient Roman god of war in the oil paintings of ancient times. Seeing this, Han Jin and Xiao Su, standing aside, couldn't help secretly exclaiming that Boss Li was really a *king seductive man. Fortunately, there were no women in this base, and even the cooks in the base cafeteria were all men. Otherwise, Boss Li would have been eaten by women sooner or later. "Deputy Drill Master, what's the matter?" Nanheng asked, obviously asking. Feng Ling just replied indifferently, "Well, I have something to do." Then she continued to ask Han Jin, "Where do I live?" Nanheng, who was completely ignored, quietly took the cigarette from his lips and glanced at him coldly. The young man was wearing a new black combat uniform. His androgynous face seemed to be glowing because of this suitable equipment, and he looked even more handsome, especially when the shadow of his ink-black hair fell on his eyes. It seemed to have a faint light that made one's imagination run wild. Realizing that he was so fascinated by this 13-year-old brat, Nanheng narrowed his eyes again, looked away, and glanced at the buildings not far away. "Han Jin, arrange a single room for him. He is young and looks much thinner than many members. If he lives in the dormitory, he will probably be eaten alive by those little brothers in a few days. Let him live alone and let him adapt to life in the base for a while." Hearing this, Feng Ling turned to look at Nanheng seriously. "Thank you, boss." It was relatively convenient for her to live alone. Whether it was taking a bath or wrapping her chest every day, she could have her own space. She didn't need to avoid others, and she didn't need to be too careful to cover herself. Nanheng didn't respond. He flicked the cigarette, but with his slender fingers, glanced at her clothes and black boots, and said coldly, 13 years old. You're not tall. After 5 years in the base, you probably won't even reach one. 7 meters. You're the first dwarf in 11 base so far. If it weren't for your speed and agility, I'm afraid you wouldn't be qualified to stand here. Hearing his words, Feng Ling couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. So in Boss Li's eyes, whether a person is good or not depends on their height. Nanheng finally looked at her coldly, and there was a slight chill in his eyes. You're so small. What other advantages do you have except for your speed? If a strong man of 200 or 300 kilograms were to fight with you, I'm afraid you wouldn't even be able to withstand a shoulder throw. Speed and ruthlessness are just forms, and physical endurance is the most basic. You don't even have the basic physical fitness, and you want to establish a foothold in 11 base? I'm afraid you think too highly of yourself. Physical fitness. This was indeed Feng Ling's weakest point so far. Compared with girls, she was strong and powerful, but compared with boys of the same age, she was indeed much weaker. The basic gap between men and women was in strength and physical fitness. I'm just young. In 3 or 5 years, boss, just wait and see. Feng Ling smiled, but the smile in her eyes was obviously just an expression to express her desire to stay and didn't really reach her heart. Nanheng looked at her indifferently and repeated indifferently. In 3 or 5 years, can you be one? 7 meters tall? Even if I'm not one. 7 meters tall, I can definitely lift you up, Boss Li. She leaned forward slightly and approached Nanheng. Her starry eyes met his, and she smiled. Or, in 3 to 5 years, Boss Li, are you afraid that I'll throw you over my shoulder and lose face? Nanheng's eyes were as bright as the stars in the night sky. She looked at him and smiled. Or, in 3 to 5 years, Boss Li is afraid that I'll throw you over my shoulder and lose face? Nanheng was expressionless. He looked at the boy's white and delicate skin, which was clearer than a woman's, watched the boy's face approach so wantonly, and breathed in the faint smell of bath milk on the boy's body, which inexplicably revealed a hint of sweetness in the fragrance. There was even a touch of powder on the boy's slightly curved lips. His thin lips, which had never been applied with any skincare products or cosmetics, had a natural clean color and seemed to be silently seductive. Facing a mere 13-year-old boy, Nan Heng's clothes were cold and shabby, but his eyes glanced at Feng Ling's chest. Her chest was flat, and her figure looked stronger than he had imagined. She was completely different from the one in the sauna room. Damn it, it was okay for him to dream at night. Facing a teenage brat in broad daylight, he actually had the King desire to strip him naked and have a good look at him. In his heart, he was already suspecting whether it was really because he lacked women that he was inexplicably attracted to a child with soft skin and tender flesh. On the surface, Nan Heng was noble and indifferent, without the slightest extra expression. Only a trace of a smile appeared in his eyes, but it was a smile so cold that it was hard to see through. His black eyes were filled with warning. Want to throw me? Then I'm afraid you'll have to train hard 24 hours a day in the next 3 or 5 years. Don't slack off at all. Otherwise, if you can't even lift a finger of mine, I'm afraid you'll be laughed at by the brothers in the base for many years. Feng Ling noticed that he glanced at her chest. Her expression did not change. It was as though she had inadvertently patted her chest, as though she was casually patting the dust. However, as she continued to pat her chest, it allowed him to clearly see the flat expanse of her chest. She looked at Nan Heng's calm and indifferent eyes without the slightest fear. Then we'll see when the time comes. Her physical fitness was not up to standard now, but it didn't mean that she couldn't do it in the future. It was only interesting when there was a challenge. Feng Ling originally just wanted to find a suitable place for herself to survive. It was enough as long as she had food and shelter. Today, she suddenly had something she really wanted to do. For example, one day in the future, she would give Nan Heng a shoulder throw and let him fall hard at her feet. Chapter 754. A month after Feng Ling officially joined 11 Base. Recently, Nan Heng had been annoyed by a bunch of trivial matters of the Li family. After the men of the Li family turned 20, they would inevitably be taken away by their families to be married. He had struggled for half a year, but he was still disturbed by the young ladies of the aristocratic families arranged by his family. Apart from turning off his phone reasonably in the base and cutting off all contacts with the outside world, as long as he stepped out the gate of the base, he would definitely be entangled by all kinds of things arranged by his family and all kinds of women. After another month in the base, he also turned off his private phone for a month, and the elders of the Li family directly came to him. At the same time, Nan Heng was watching the members of Team 1 practice shooting in the training ground behind. A group of team members stood in a standard horizontal row, and 5 people came forward to take guns. Nan Heng leaned against a stone table not far away, playing with a gun in his hand, and looked indifferently at those people who were not familiar with shooting skills. After all, most of the people receiving training now were newbies. Among 100 people, there were at least 20 good shooters, but for Nan Heng, it was still not enough. When Feng Ling and the others came forward together and picked up the gun, her movements were standard and neat. When the others were still adjusting their positions, Feng Ling had fired a shot forward without hesitation. With a bang, she hit the bullseye. Feng Ling had only been in the base for a month. During this month, Feng Ling did well in everything, but she should have just touched the shooting training, but her shooting skills were obviously not the skills of a newbie. Kay once said that Feng Ling's shooting skills were very good. When she saved Kay, she used his gun. Nan Heng watched from a distance. The man in the black combat uniform looked cold and noble, leaning there without moving, completely like a boss, but with an aura that no one dared to approach. Then, he casually turned the gun in his hand in the palm of his hand. Without standing up or changing his movements, he directly fired a shot in the direction where Feng Ling had just hit the bullseye more than 100 meters away. No one expected that a gunshot would suddenly come from behind. They were all shocked, but in the blink of an eye, they saw that the target 50 meters in front of Feng Ling was instantly shot through the middle, and Feng Ling's bullet was also shot down. Nan Hung tossed the spear in his hand onto the stone table. His expression was indifferent, as if he hadn't fired the shot just now. He said indifferently, "Continue practicing." Han Jin, Xiao Su, Feng Ling, the members who were training, Boss directly shot Feng Ling's bullet down. Wasn't it obvious that he didn't care about Feng Ling's results at all? Now that they were told to continue practicing, Feng Ling was already looked down upon by Boss. If they continued to practice, wouldn't Boss throw up watching them? TSK. Fortunately, this Feng Ling was not a woman. Otherwise, he would really suspect whether Boss was actually interested in Feng Ling or not. But this boy was only 13 years old. Even if there might be something wrong with Boss's sexual orientation, he wouldn't go so far as to attack a child, right? Feng Ling didn't think much of the suddenly hollow target in front of her. Everyone had 3 chances to shoot. As usual, she loaded the bullets and continued to shoot. The last 2 consecutive shots accurately hit the bullseye, passed through the empty bullseye, and landed on a tree trunk not far away, leaving a deep bullet mark. After finishing, Feng Ling neatly handed the gun to the next person and turned to return to the team. After shooting training, they temporarily rested for 10 minutes. Feng Ling turned to the outside of the training ground to pick up the half bottle of mineral water she had drunk. This position was very close to Nan Heng's, but she didn't go over. She only saw that Nan Hung was surrounded by several members, and many of them were asking him for advice on shooting skills. To put it bluntly, they were trying to curry favor with Boss. Feng Ling took another sip of water, screwed the mineral water bottle, and turned to leave. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of Fat Eye, who usually liked to fool around in Team 1, stretching out his leg to block her. Feng Ling only glanced at him indifferently. Not only was she not tripped, but she also raised her leg to counterattack. Fat Eye was secretly laughing, but unexpectedly, Feng Ling's leg had already greeted him. He felt a pain in his leg and jumped up from his seat. The next moment, his buttocks were kicked again. Fat Eye clutched his buttocks in pain and began to howl. As he cried, he jumped to Nan Heng's side and shouted, "Boss, quickly control this boy Feng Ling. He kicked my buttocks." Nan Hung glanced at Fat Eye and then at Feng Ling, who was behind him. Feng Ling also rolled her eyes at Fat Eye. What was the use of asking Nan Hung to control her? Boss nominally led Team 1, but in fact, he didn't care about anything at all. He was completely a hands-off boss and left everything to the deputy drill master Han Jin, who probably didn't care about it at all. Besides, why should he care about her? What relationship did she have with him? Did he need to care about her? Just as Feng Ling turned around and was about to put her mineral water aside, she suddenly heard the man's indifferent voice. "Fat Eye likes to fool around. Do you really want to stoop to his level? If you kick him a few more times, he won't need to lose weight anymore. I'm afraid that he will be swollen for the rest of his life." "Fat Eye, boss, are you sure you care about Feng Ling? Aren't you openly and secretly insulting me?" Feng Ling glanced at him and replied, Next time, I'll kick him in another place. I guarantee that next time he will be more evenly swollen." "Fat Eye, boss, help." There was a burst of laughter around. Nanheng also snorted and raised his foot to kick away Fat Eye, who was about to pounce on him for help. "How can you put on such a pitiful expression in front of me with your fat face? Hurry up and lose weight. If you can't lose 15 pounds in a month, get out of my sight and join another team." "Fat Eye, sob, I feel so wronged. Although I am fat, I am flexible. If I am not flexible enough, how can I have the ability to enter Team 1? Boss, you are discriminating against me." At this time, Han Jin walked over to Feng Ling, seeing her indifferent attitude, as if she still didn't like to blend in with the others. He said, "Have you learned how to shoot a long time ago? Your marksmanship is not bad. Are you interested in learning professional long-range sniping?" Feng Ling glanced at Han Jin. "I can shoot, but I haven't learned long-range sniping." Han Jin nodded. In this month, he really liked this child Feng Ling. Although she was a little young, she was really outstanding. Our base has been established for so many years, and there are less than 5 people who have reached the standard of long-range sniping, among which the best is Boss Lee. You'd better learn from them in the future and try to get on good terms with Boss. Let him teach you. Chapter 755. Hanjin was startled and immediately laughed. You're really a clean stream in our base. Among these hundreds of people, I'm afraid only you, Feng Ling, dare to say in front of Boss that you don't like him. Boss's temper is a bit bad, but do you really hate him so openly? Hanjin paused and laughed. Nan Hung was about to pick up the gun on the stone table when his fingers paused. Fatai wanted to play coquettish with Boss again, but when he suddenly saw Boss's eyes turn cold, the fat all over his body trembled, and he subconsciously avoided to the side, not daring to come closer. Nanhang's expression was very calm, and he glanced at Feng Ling lightly. Feng Ling didn't deny it or say much, but just turned away, not intending to take Han Jin's suggestion seriously. Han Jin's words were just a joke, but he didn't expect that Feng Ling was really cold. He turned his head and glanced at Boss. After all, the training of long-range snipers was recently mentioned by Boss at the base meeting, and he also mentioned Feng Ling's potential. If it weren't for Boss, Han Jin would never dare to make this decision. But now, had Feng Ling unknowingly rejected Boss? As if seeing the coldness in Boss's eyes, the air around the shooting training ground seemed to freeze, and the people around didn't dare to breathe. Boss, about the sniper. Han Jin hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still plucked up the courage to ask. Nan Hung played with the gun in his hand with one hand and glanced at the direction in which Feng Ling left. Give him a chance to train his physical fitness for 2 years. If his physical fitness still doesn't meet the standard after 2 years, he will automatically give up the spot of long-range sniper training. There was no warmth in Nanhang's voice. Li Nanheng told himself that Feng Ling was indeed very talented, had good marksmanship, and was at the right age to start training, so he temporarily gave up the spot. If it weren't for the fact that 11 Base really needed this kind of talented newcomer, he would have kicked him out of the base. Although 11 Base was under the jurisdiction of Li Nanheng, the Li family had a lot of things to deal with. He had been trained in 11 Base since he was a child, and took over the base after he grew up. Now, he had to go back to the Li family to deal with some things. The base would be temporarily managed by the U.S. Police Headquarters and the Los Angeles Military Affairs Department for 2 years, as well as the people sent by the Li family. In other words, in the next 2 years, Li Nanheng would not appear in 11 Base. Before leaving, Li Nanheng invited the brothers in the base to a 7-star hotel in Los Angeles. This hotel was currently the most expensive and luxurious hotel in Los Angeles. It was resplendent and luxurious. Seeing that Li Nanheng's car had arrived, the waiters came out to greet him in an orderly manner. Just as they walked into the hotel, the lobby manager suddenly caught sight of Feng Ling, glanced at her, and raised his eyebrows in surprise. This kid, wasn't he the guy who accidentally broke into their red wine cup tower 2 months ago? The lobby manager stared at Feng Ling for a few seconds, but Feng Ling walked straight in as if she didn't know him. She was wearing the same black uniform as the people brought by Mr. Li, and the people of 11 Base were not to be trifled with. The lobby manager didn't know who she was and didn't dare to say anything, but he still glanced at Feng Ling from time to time. Nanheng walked in front, but it didn't mean that he didn't notice the change in the face of the lobby manager behind him. The tall man paused in his footsteps. His clear, black eyes swept over Feng Ling, who was being watched, and then he coldly glanced at the lobby manager. What? Do you know each other? The lobby manager hesitated for a moment. He felt that this Feng Ling looked much thinner than the others. He didn't know if he sneaked in, so he turned to Nanheng and said with a smile, Mr. Li, his name is Feng Ling, right? Nanheng's cold expression didn't change. He glanced coldly at Feng Ling, who was still expressionless, and said indifferently, What? A few months ago, he knocked down the red wine cup tower in the lobby of our hotel, and dozens of high-end crystal glasses were broken on the ground. Our boss saw that he was young and didn't have enough money to pay for it, so he asked him to work in the back kitchen of the hotel for a month to pay for the crystal glasses, but he only worked in the back kitchen for a week and then ran away. If he weren't young, we would have called the police. After all, the crystal glasses were worth a lot of money. Feng Ling knew what was waiting for her from the moment she walked into this hotel. She not only worked in the back kitchen for a week, but also broke a lot of high-end tableware in the back kitchen. Why did she leave? Of course, it was because the people in this hotel, from the waiters in the lobby to the apprentices in the back kitchen, were all snobbish. They thought that he was young and easy to bully, so they made trouble for him in every way. They even thought that he could be played like a monkey because he was young. They touched her bottom line again and again. In the end, she kicked over the dishwasher in the back kitchen and left. Even 10 security guards in this kind of hotel couldn't beat her, so they couldn't stop her. After hearing the lobby manager's words, Nanheng turned to look at Feng Ling. Is there such a thing? Feng Ling said calmly, yes, after I earn money from a mission, I will immediately pay back the money for the glasses. I won't tarnish the reputation of the base. Nanheng remained calm, but the lobby manager said sarcastically, Mr. Li, I heard that the people selected by 11 base are not ordinary people. They won't take pity on such a little beggar, right? Why'd they take him in? 2 months ago, she passed by the glass window of our hotel and saw there was a leftover steak and pork bone rice inside. She was probably hungry and wanted to come in to take them away, but our hotel has its own rules, so we couldn't let her take them away. When she was chased out by our security guards, she beat them up with just a few moves and even knocked over the wine glass tower. Nanheng didn't speak at first, but his eyes were looking straight at Feng Ling, who had been standing there expressionlessly. When the lobby manager secretly laughed and thought that Mr. Li would definitely drive this brat out, Nanheng first called his name. Feng Ling. Then he said, besides steak and poor bone rice, what else do you want to eat? The lobby manager's expression instantly changed. He turned his eyes to Feng Ling in disbelief. Feng Ling also raised her eyes to look at Nanheng, wondering why he didn't get angry. Obviously, she had embarrassed 11 base, hadn't she? As soon as she met the man's eyes, Feng Ling paused and said, those two look good, but I didn't eat them at that time. I don't know how they taste. Want to try them? Feng Ling glanced at him again and then nodded. Nanheng coldly glanced at the dumbfounded lobby manager. Give him 5 steaks and 5 bowls of pork bone rice. If it's not enough, order more. Lobby manager. Dash. Chapter 756. Feng Ling. I can't eat so much. Nanheng glanced at her. Eat as much as you can. Look at how thin you are. You can't even eat a few servings of rice. How much room do you expect your physical strength to grow? Feng Ling. But he couldn't expect her to grow from a 13-year-old boy who weighed more than 80 kilograms to a fatty who weighed 180 kilograms. The lobby manager was surprised that Mr. Li took such good care of him. He didn't dare to speak anymore and could only quickly turn around and ask the waiter to take these people in. At the same time, the lobby manager also smiled at Feng Ling, young Master Feng. In addition to steak and pork bone rice, our hotel has other more high-end specialties, such as airship seafood, or Feng Ling's expression didn't change at all because of his deliberately exaggerated young Master Feng. She completely ignored him and turned to go upstairs with the team. The lobby manager stood there a little awkwardly and glared at Feng Ling's back. However, when he suddenly saw Nanheng's cold gaze, he immediately shrank his shoulders, shivered all over, and quickly put on an apologetic smile. When they reached the banquet hall upstairs, Feng Ling was about to walk in with Fat Eye and the others, when Han Jin suddenly patted her on the shoulder. Feng Ling, boss wants you to go over. Feng Ling looked back. Didn't I come here for dinner? Why did he call me? Han Jin spread his hands and shrugged, meaning that he didn't know. Feng Ling thought for 2 seconds, turned around, and walked back. When she came to the marble escalator, she saw a tall man wearing the same black uniform as her playing with a silver high-end lighter. She glanced at his back and walked over. Boss! The man looked back at her. In. Just an in. Didn't he call her for anything else? Feng Ling was a little surprised, but since Nanheng didn't speak, she couldn't turn around and leave, so she took 2 steps closer and came to his side. Boss, what's up? The silver lighter made a crisp sound in the man's hand, and the man glanced at her indifferently. How much money do you owe here? Feng Ling raised her eyelids and looked at the lobby manager, who was busy greeting other members of 11 Base on the first floor. The cups I broke are said to be crystal cups, and the cheapest one is at least more than 100 yuan. Plus the dishwasher and tableware I kicked over. I estimate that it's about 20,000 yuan. Nanhing pressed her head with one hand. Feng Ling paused because of his action and looked up at him. The man who was much taller than her lowered his dark eyes and lowered his head to approach her. His voice and breath were both very cold. You dare to sell yourself here for 20,000 yuan for a month. I didn't sell myself here, but I really don't have the money to pay them back. If it weren't for the fact that the people in the kitchen are so annoying, I would have worked here for a month before leaving. After all, I did make a mistake first. The man sneered and pressed his hand heavily on her head again. Feng Ling couldn't avoid him until the man had ravaged her head enough and let go of her. He glanced at her messy and inexplicably sexy hairstyle and smiled coldly. You still know how to be moral. It seems that your nature is not bad. Feng Ling's face was cold. What made boss think that there's something wrong with my character? All right, go in and eat with them. Don't worry about the small problem of the hotel. I'll help you solve it. Hearing this, Feng Ling instinctively wanted to thank him, but the man continued. The condition is that you train your physical strength well from today onwards. 2 years later, when I return to the base, if you still can't hold a long-range sniper rifle firmly, you could get out of Team 1. Feng Ling originally wanted to thank him for helping her solve this problem. When she had money in the future, she would definitely return this 20,000 yuan to him. In the end, she swallowed the words back into her stomach and glanced at the man without saying anything. Forget it. Anyway, she didn't need to see him for at least the next 2 years. When 5 portions of steak and 5 portions of pork bone rice were delivered, the lobby manager directly asked someone to place them in front of Feng Ling one by one. The people at this table were all members of Team 1. Although they had heard the gist of it when they were downstairs, they didn't expect that boss really planned to let Feng Ling eat so much. Who didn't know that Feng Ling ate the least among the brothers? Usually, everyone often advised him that it was the age of growth and that he must eat more to be as tall as everyone else. Otherwise, if his physical strength couldn't meet the requirements and he couldn't keep up with the height, boss would definitely think of ways to bully him. But this much the amount of rice was not small. How could she eat it all? Feng Ling was very calm. If he asked her to eat, she would eat. In the end, if she couldn't eat anymore, she wouldn't really be stuffed to death. In fact, her appetite was not small. However, compared with the group of big guys in the base who wolfed down their food, her usual appetite became poor cat food. Some people even said that she was like a little kitten. As long as she didn't stretch out her claws, she was very beautiful and cute, but once she got angry and stretched out her claws, no one could catch her. It really made people gnash their teeth with hatred. Today, for the first time, Li Nanhing sat at the same table with the members of Team 1. It should be known that boss usually sat with the drill masters. After all, he didn't have anything in common with this group of people. But today, boss actually sat here like this. He even sat down next to Feng Ling Fat Eye, silently whispered to Xiao Su next to him, "Boss, aren't you a bit too considerate of Feng Ling?" In fact, Fat Eye felt that his words should be heard by boss, so there were some words that he didn't dare to say. What he wanted to say was whether there was really a problem with boss's sexual orientation. Not only was there a problem, but he even didn't let go of a child. Was he planning to raise a handsome boy from a young age? Xiao Su said coldly, "If you were as capable as Feng Ling when you were 13 years old, boss would also take care of you." Fat Eye, as a flexible fatty, he was actually despised again. Although Feng Ling learns everything quickly and his shooting skills are also very accurate, after all, boss is really too kind to him. If he asked us to eat together, we should eat together, but he specially ordered food for Feng Ling, obviously. He is supporting Feng Ling. Also, boss has never sat with us before, but now he directly sat next to Feng Ling. Chapter 757. Fatai had just finished muttering and was about to take a sip of water when he almost spat it out because of Nanhang's words. He coughed a few times until his fat face turned red. 10 portions? Even if he was fat, he couldn't eat so much. Fatai instantly understood the feeling of being specially taken care of by his boss. He silently smacked his lips, and this time, He didn't even dare to let out a fart. But in fact, the main problem didn't have much to do with the steak and pork bone rice, right? Wasn't the important thing that Boss was sitting next to Feng Ling? Feng Ling pushed the rice in front of her forward. No, I can't eat it. Just give the extra 4 portions to Fat Tai. Fat Tai hurriedly shook his head and waved his hand, looking at Nan Hung for help. Nan Hung didn't look at him, nor did he allow her to give the rice away. He just said indifferently, whatever. After returning to the base in the evening, you can do physical training for 5 hours. Just make sure you're full. 5 hours? Feng Ling's eyes flickered. Fat Tai and the others no longer envied Boss for taking care of him, but looked at him with sympathy. The physical training of 11 base was simply devil training, okay? 1 hour could take half of a person's life. 5 hours of physical training. Boss probably didn't intend to let Feng Ling see the sun when she was 14 years old. Feng Ling turned to look at the man beside her who could almost decide her life and death with one sentence. Nan Hung glanced at him meaningfully. He was casually wearing a black combat jacket and a black t-shirt, which clearly outlined the man's perfect figure. At such a close distance, the man's pure hormonal scent almost covered the excess air around Feng Ling. More importantly, the man's eyes were faintly dangerous, as if reminding her that even if he would leave 11 base for 2 years, he would not leave until the day after tomorrow, and at least he would torture her for 2 more nights. Just when Feng Ling pursed her lips speechlessly, the man suddenly threw a pair of chopsticks at her. Eat at least 2 bowls. Otherwise, I won't care if you collapse from hunger during the night training. You still have to continue training. Did he like torturing people so much? Or did he just find her an eyesore? Feng Ling picked up her chopsticks and began to eat. After eating a portion, she looked at the steak by the side and could not eat at all. At this time, Fat Tai suddenly interjected. Steak is a good thing to strengthen muscles. Little Feng Ling, look at yourself. Not only are you thin, you don't even have any muscles. Last time when we were training, your arms were exposed. They were white and slender like a little girl. Eat more, it's good for you. Feng Ling immediately raised her eyes and glared at Fat Tai. Fat Tai continued to gloat, but before he could finish, the waiter who had just left came back with 10 steaks and 10 pig bone rice. As soon as he saw the things they brought in, Fat Tai only took one glance and instantly let out a loud burp. His eyes immediately froze. Feng Ling cut the steak and slowly stuffed it into her mouth. She glanced at the dumbfounded Fat Tai with a hint of a smile and said, "Hurry up and turn all the fat on your body into muscle. Eat more. It'll be good for you." Fat Tai, what the F asterisk CK? If I eat all this, I'll die. He had only made a few sarcastic remarks about Feng Ling, but Boss actually wanted to kill him in such a despicable way. They were all men. Why was there such a difference in treatment? At night, everyone returned to the base. It was rare that they didn't have to train at night. After eating and drinking their fill, everyone went back to take a shower and rest. However, Feng Ling was carried out of her residence by Nan Hung at 9 o'clock in the middle of the night like a kitten and directly brought to the training ground. Feng Ling ate 2 portions of rice and steak each and felt uncomfortable. Now that she was suddenly brought here, Feng Ling, who usually didn't like to show her emotions, had an obviously ugly expression on her face. "Boss, my stomach is uncomfortable. Can't you let me lie down for a while?" However, before she could finish speaking, Nan Hung forcefully pushed her over to the horizontal bar. Then, with an indifferent expression, he grabbed her collar and lifted her onto the horizontal bar. Feng Ling had to grab both sides of the bar to steady herself. At the same time, she looked at him with a strange expression. However, the man looked at her obviously uncomfortable appearance and did not have the slightest sympathy. Instead, he said disdainfully, "Shouldn't you use exercise to speed up digestion if you feel uncomfortable? Go back to bed and lie down. Are you planning to vomit and defecate tomorrow morning because of indigestion? Is it that serious?" It was good enough for Feng Ling to eat her fill since she was a child. Who knew that indigestion could happen? Nan Hung snorted. "I gave you a chance to strengthen your physical training. Are you not going to appreciate it? Appreciate it?" First, he deliberately made her look like this. Then he took her out and threw her onto the horizontal bar to force her to exercise to digest the food in her stomach. Anyone could appreciate it if they wanted, but she didn't. However, Feng Ling was still stared at by Nan Heng. She did 3 consecutive hours of physical training on the training ground. In the end, when she did 97 push-ups, she really couldn't get up. She lay on the ground powerlessly and became like a corpse, motionless. Nan Heng walked over and raised his foot to kick her leg. Continue. There's still 3 left. Boss, it's been 3 hours. Feng Ling lay on the ground motionlessly and closed her eyes to say, I owe you 3 today. Next time, I'll make up for 30. Hearing her words, the man sneered in a low voice and narrowed his eyes at her coldly. Didn't you vow to give me a shoulder throw? You can't even hold on for the last 3 push-ups. With your little ability, not to mention a shoulder throw, even if you really go out to do a mission in the future, you'll be defeated by your own physical strength before you meet the enemy. Feng Ling frowned. Even though the man's black leather boots were pressing on her back, she still gritted her teeth, and with her already weak body and the weight on her back, she raised her arms bit by bit. With sweat dripping from her forehead, she said in a low voice, 98. Nan Heng looked at her indifferently, his foot still on her back, until the kitten, who temporarily didn't even have the strength to stretch out her claws, counted to 100. He withdrew his foot, turned around, and pointed to the muscle training equipment not far away with his chin. Go up and stretch your limbs for half an hour. Chapter 758. It wasn't until dawn that Feng Ling returned to her single room to rest wearily. However, as soon as the alarm clock rang, she opened her eyes instinctively. Even though she felt that she was about to collapse, she still forced herself to get up, changed into clean clothes, and went out for morning training. Nan Heng would leave 11 base early tomorrow morning. He would be away for 2 years or even longer, but he didn't sleep all night. Last night, probably because he really couldn't sleep and really wanted to find someone to torment, only Feng Ling, an unlucky guy whom he disliked, was picked out. During the morning training, Nan Heng sat aside, still playing with the silver lighter in boredom, and looked at Feng Ling, who was obviously exhausted but still gritted her teeth and insisted on doing every movement in the crowd. Boss, last night, several brothers of Team 3 and Team 4 saw that you brought Feng Ling to train alone. This morning, they were all talking about whether you really like Feng Ling. Xiao Su said in a low voice. Nan Heng raised his eyebrows coldly. What do you mean? That is, they all said that you want to sleep with Feng Ling after he grows up. Xiao Su coughed, couldn't help gossiping, and finally said it. Nan Heng suddenly paused with the lighter in his hand and coldly glanced at Xiao Su's face. Sleep with who? As soon as Xiao Su saw the boss's expression, he instantly felt that he was gossiping in the wrong direction. He felt a chill on his neck and couldn't help shaking the goosebumps on his body. He coughed and whispered, that is to say, Boss, you like Feng Ling very much. Want to raise him up and then eat him. Nan Heng turned the phone, his fingers paused on the side of the phone, and his eyes indifferently glanced in the direction of the black-haired boy in the first row of the crowd. Raise him up? Eat him up? Huh. Xiao Su trembled with fear on the side. He didn't know whether the boss was provoked by these words or something else. But at this moment, the boss's expression was really incomprehensible. It was cold and lethal, but there was a trace of emotion that he couldn't figure out. TSK, how terrifying. Halfway through the morning training, Feng Ling's lips looked much whiter than usual under the scorching sun in the morning, and the boy's ink-black eyes were a little dim, but he still made accurate postures. Even though Han Jin could see that Feng Ling was a little exhausted today, he still persisted. Today's sun was particularly big. It had been scorching since 8 o'clock in the morning, making people's heads hurt. But morning training had its own rules. Unless you were so sick that you couldn't get up, you had to crawl to the training ground, even if you had to. Not a single delay was allowed. Last night, Boss's training of Feng Ling was too harsh. Not to mention the newbies, even the veterans in the base might not be able to stand it for a whole night. At this time, Kay walked in from outside. Kay did not belong to Team 1 for the time being. He was in Team 2, but in a year or two, with his qualifications, he would be able to join Team 1 for training. When he walked into the training camp of Team 1, Kay looked in the direction of Feng Ling, but it was a little far away, and he couldn't see Feng Ling's expression clearly. He turned to see Boss beside him, so he walked over. "Boss!" Nanheng took out a cigarette, bit it between his thin lips, tilted his head, and lit it. Then he glanced at Kay, who had just approached. "What did you find?" Kay shook his head. "I went to the place where Feng Ling and I met for the first time to investigate, but there was no one around, and no one lived there. I couldn't find out his background at all. And in the hotel yesterday, they also said that Feng Ling only told them his name and didn't mention anything else. Even when he worked in the hotel for a week, he didn't show any identity card. If we can't find out his background, we can't find out his background at all." Very few people could remain blank under the in-depth investigation of 11 Base and didn't even have a simple detailed introduction, unless he was really a wandering boy without parents or any source of income. "Have you investigated the orphanage that we went to last time?" "Yes, but Director Lin and several other leaders of the orphanage have been transferred to Washington a few months ago for some reason. We can't contact them for the time being, and the rest of the people don't know anything about it. And I don't think Feng Ling can come out of a place like the orphanage. After all, there are many children in that place, and they have a very normal education model. It's impossible for someone as rebellious as him to survive in that kind of place." What he said was true, but the figure in the orphanage overlapped with Feng Ling's figure again and again. Nanheng suspected and dispelled his doubts several times. He sent Kay and the investigators in the base to investigate Feng Ling's origin, but the result was still blank, and there was no trace of his past. Of course, Feng Ling knew that Nanheng had always been suspicious of her, but he couldn't be sure, so he couldn't rashly do anything to him. There was really nothing to investigate about her past. What background could a child raised by a wolf have? But the most vulnerable thing about her was her gender. 11 Base would never allow a woman to stay here. But if she left 11 Base, she didn't know where else would be more suitable for her to live. "Are you sure that no one was with him before he approached you?" Nanheng took the cigarette between his lips, the spark between his fingers, and there was a cold light in his eyes. "Is he so clean that you can completely trust him to bring him back to the base?" "Boss, although we can't do things completely based on intuition, I think Feng Ling is young and innocent. In his world, there are only things like food, warm clothes, fighting, and playing with guns. As long as you give him a place to settle down, he can be more loyal than anyone else. And you can also see that he is not the type of person who will easily follow anyone who gives him a meal. He has pride in his bones. Probably in his eyes, only a place like 11 Base is worthy of keeping him," Kay said confidently. Because Kay had seen Feng Ling's skills with his own eyes and had been with him for so long, he was very sure that Feng Ling was a person with absolutely no motives. Nanheng didn't speak, but looked through the white smoke at the team that was still training not far away. At this moment, suddenly someone in the first row fell down, and then the people around let out a low cry. Feng Ling. The deputy drill master Han Jin saw, clearly in front, that Feng Ling, who was training, turned pale little by little, and his lips were also completely pale. Just when he was about to continue the next training movement, the boy who had always been energetic and particularly serious in training suddenly fell down powerlessly. Fortunately, the people behind him were not far away from him and reached out to catch him. Otherwise, he would have fallen to the ground directly. She heard someone call out, "Is Feng Ling fainted from exhaustion?" Then he caught a glimpse of the commotion over there. Nanheng suddenly pressed out the cigarette in the ashtray, got up, and strode over Dash. Chapter 759. Nanheng abruptly put out the cigarette in the ashtray, got up, and strode over. As soon as he saw Feng Ling being supported by the people behind the team, Nanheng narrowed his eyes slightly and dragged the person who was about to be carried over. Feng Ling was in a daze and couldn't stand still. She could only vaguely hear someone talking, but she couldn't open her eyes. When she was forcibly dragged over, her head hit the man's strong chest, and the refreshing smell of cigarettes poured into her nose. She frowned, and the next moment, she was carried on the man's shoulder with one hand. This action almost made Feng Ling vomit, but she really had no strength. She was so exhausted that she couldn't even lift her fingers. She closed her eyes, and her breathing became heavier. It was really uncomfortable. Continue to practice. I'll send her to the infirmary. Nanheng completely ignored everyone's gazes. Without a word, he carried Feng Ling up and immediately suppressed everyone's worries. Feng Ling still wanted to maintain a little dignity, but after being carried up like this, she really had no choice. When Nanheng took the man away, his eyes were cold, and even Han Jin could feel the awe-inspiring aura from his boss. He did not dare to ask anything and directly called Xiao Su, who was also stunned, to follow him. Hurry up and help. See if the doctors in the infirmary are here. If not, quickly call them back. Xiao Su nodded and quickly turned to run out. When Nanheng walked out of the training camp of Team 1, Feng Ling couldn't open her eyes in a daze and could only say with difficulty in a hoarse voice, almost breathing, "Put me down." Guessing that Feng Ling was uncomfortable because of the shoulder, Nanheng put Feng Ling down from his shoulder. However, at the moment when Feng Ling staggered and couldn't stand firm, he caught a glimpse of her pale lips and haggard and transparent face that was whiter than a woman's. He casually carried her in his arms and said in a cold voice like a cold lake in a snowy night, "You can collapse after a whole night of physical training and 2 hours of morning exercise. You're really a good-for-nothing." Feng Ling finally opened her eyes with some difficulty. Watching the man's cold face as he carried her toward the infirmary, she said, "Put me down. I can walk by myself." Her voice was very low but full of determination. Xiao Su, who was walking in front, heard Feng Ling's words and couldn't help praying for him in his heart. "Little ancestor, don't court death." Boss's face is almost frozen. It's already incredibly kind of him to carry you away. How dare you court death? Do you really want to be regarded as a waste and kicked out of 11 base by boss? Do you want to be regarded as trash and kicked out of 11 base? You have no one to rely on and have no identity certificate. Even if you want to be a child, no one will hire you. You are only 13 years old. How can you survive? Their boss had always been merciless to those who were useless. When he became heartless, no one could stop him. If he really threw her down, even if she didn't die, she would be crippled, so she just stared at him warily. Seeing that he didn't throw her away and didn't seem to be bothered to say anything, she finally learned to be obedient. She barely suppressed her pride and didn't say anything more. She didn't say anything more. The youth's warm breath hit his chest, and he could feel the warmth of the youth's breath through the black uniform. Nanheng thought expressionlessly that this guy looked so pitiful. His voice was as soft and hoarse as a little girl's. Those who didn't know him might think he was acting coquettishly. Nanheng really didn't want to argue with a patient. The point was that this patient fell down because of his intensive training last night. He sent her to the infirmary. The doctors in the infirmary were all there. After taking Feng Ling in, they were about to take off her clothes for examination. Even if they didn't take off her clothes, they had to lift her clothes and listen to her so that they could know what was wrong with her. After lying on the bed, Feng Ling glanced outside the door to make sure that Nanheng and Xiao Su had not come in. When the doctor was about to lift her clothes, she quickly raised her hand to press the doctor's hand, looked at the doctor, and said hoarsely, "I'm fine. I just couldn't stand the intensive training last night. I only went back to rest for half an hour in the morning and didn't have time to eat breakfast before continuing the morning training. I'm just exhausted." Xiao Su said that you suddenly fainted. Generally speaking, many young men in our base have very good physical fitness. Whether you're exhausted or suffering from heat stroke, since you are here, you have to have a good examination. Come on, take off your clothes. The doctor glanced at him. Having been a doctor at the base for so long, it was the first time that he had seen such a beautiful boy. However, he didn't expect that not only was he so delicate and tender, but it was also so difficult for him to take off his clothes for examination. However, the doctor did not dare to speak carelessly. After all, he was only a doctor at the base, and no one here was to be trifled with. Nowadays, there were many feminine men who looked like women, and young men who looked prettier than little girls were also fair and tender. The one in front of him was probably the best of the fair and tender young men. The doctor was not surprised at all. Moreover, he was still young, and no one could predict what he would grow into in the future. When he was in his teens, he would be a handsome young man, and when he was in his 20s, he would become a tall and rugged young man. When the doctor was about to reach out again, Feng Ling forced the doctor's hand away with the little strength she had just saved. When she sat up, she was a little breathless and said hoarsely, "Can you give me a glass of water first?" Seeing that his lips were indeed white and a little dry, and he probably had some symptoms of heat stroke, the doctor sighed and turned to pour a glass of warm water. Feng Ling took it and said thank you. After taking a few sips, she raised her head and said, "I'm much better. Just a glass of water? Why didn't I know that this water was an elixir?" The doctor glanced at him suspiciously and reached out to touch Feng Ling's forehead. Feng Ling was not used to being touched by others since she was a child. Probably because she stayed with wolves when she was a child. She was very sensitive and hostile to any touch. At this moment, she suppressed her instinct and cautiously sat on the bed to say, "I'm really fine." "No, it seems that your mental state is not very good. How long did you do the intensive training last night?" The doctor asked. "From 11 o'clock in the evening until 5:30 in the morning," Feng Ling answered truthfully. Chapter 760. The doctor had obviously given up the plan to examine her and put the stethoscope in his hand aside. But I think many young men in this base have endured it bit by bit. You still have a long time to go. After all, you are still young. In fact, Feng Ling also knew that Boss didn't maliciously train her like this. It was just that her physical fitness was not up to standard. At least she was still a woman inside. She really couldn't do the things that some men could do. But some things couldn't be achieved in a day. She couldn't do it now, but it didn't mean that she couldn't do it in a year. As long as she persisted every day, she believed that these physical difficulties would be overcome. It doesn't matter. I can bear it. After all, I'm still young. If 1 year is not enough, then 3 years. If 3 years is not enough, then 5 years. When I'm 20 years old, I will definitely not be like this anymore. When the doctor moved his hand away, Feng Ling's instinctive sense of defense also disappeared, and her voice became slightly softer. At this time, Li Nanheng walked into the infirmary. When he entered the door, he saw Feng Ling, who had just fainted, sitting on the bed, holding a glass of water and saying this. The boy's hair was very fine and soft. The wind outside the infirmary blew in through the window and gently brushed against his forehead. He didn't know where the wind brushed, but his heart was inexplicably itchy. Nanheng coldly waved away the inexplicable itch in his heart and walked over. "Boss!" When the doctor looked back and saw him, he immediately stood up straight. Even if he was not a member of the training team of this base, he instinctively stood solemnly and did not dare to neglect him. Nanheng responded coldly and walked in. His upper body was still covered with a black jacket, and a strand of short black hair hung down as he lowered his head to look at Feng Ling. Just by standing here, he looked extremely masculine, more like a dormant ice beast, coldly staring at the boy whose face was still a little pale. Feng Ling saw his cold eyes, remembered the process when this man suddenly carried her all the way to the infirmary, and then looked at him like this, and inexplicably felt that her legs were a little soft. Was it because she was tired last night? But now Feng Ling was not in the mood to appreciate Boss Li's beauty. After all, she was almost forced to take off her clothes by the doctor, and it was not convenient for him to hear her taking off her clothes. Otherwise, if he knew that she refused to take off her clothes, he would probably be suspicious again. But now that she was sitting on the bed in the infirmary, she met Nanheng's eyes that seemed to be sizing her up and yet had no warmth. She really felt that there was no way out. What happened to him? Nanheng took off his coat, threw it on the bed where Feng Ling was, and asked in a low and cold voice. This question was obviously directed at the doctor. I took a quick look at him. He's just not in a good state of mind. It's because of physical exhaustion. He didn't eat anything in the morning, and he was exposed to the sun for 2 hours when he was already exhausted. He's beyond his physical limit, but it's only his body that's weak. His mind and consciousness are still very clear. There's no other major problem. He'll be fine after a day of rest and a good meal. The doctor said simply. After all, the people in this base were all young men. They were not so pretentious. There was no need to explain too much. Besides, Bosley was just the boss here, not their parents, so he certainly didn't need the doctor to explain too much. Hearing the doctor's words, Feng Ling secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She thought that things would end here. However, unexpectedly, at this moment, Nan Hung suddenly pulled up her trousers. Before Feng Ling had time to stop him, her entire white and slender legs were suddenly exposed, including her knees, which were still red and swollen from last night's physical training. Feng Ling hurriedly pushed the man's hand away and was about to pull down her rolled-up trousers, only to hear that the man didn't take her delicate and white calves seriously at all. She didn't ask much, but only added to the doctor, "Deal with the injury on his knees." This injury? The doctor glanced at the injury on Feng Ling's legs. This was a simple injury at first glance. It was just a broken skin with a little blood oozing out and a little bruise. Usually, it was not uncommon for members of this base to have such injuries. They almost didn't need any medicine at all and would recover in a few days. But this, Bosley wanted him to apply medicine. The doctor first took a deep look at Feng Ling, then maintained a very calm expression and said 2 words, "Okay." Standing behind, Xiao Su felt that his image of boss had gradually become disillusioned. Didn't he mercilessly go to special training last night? Today he felt sorry for him. F***CK. Boss, aren't you being too dishonest? TSK. Xiao Su secretly looked at Feng Ling, who was sitting on the bed with a dumbfounded look and seemed to be unaware of the situation she was in, and secretly sympathized with her in his heart. Although it was a good thing to be liked by boss, you could only blame little Feng Ling for not being a F***king woman. If the elders of the Li family knew this, they would probably blow up the base and dig him out to kill him. There's no need to apply medicine to such a small wound. Boss, I'll go back and rest for 2 hours. With great difficulty, Feng Ling pushed Nan Heng's hand away and moved her legs to the side. I don't have any intention of using my illness to slack off. Just let me rest for 2 hours. I'll definitely make up for the training I missed in the morning in the afternoon. Nan Heng glanced at her lightly. Although 11 Base doesn't sympathize with the weak, ordinary people will have this kind of normal reaction when their physical strength exceeds the limit. If you exceed the limit a few times, you will find that your potential is infinitely magnified little by little, and your endurance will gradually expand. You can rest today and don't have to go back in the afternoon. If you really want to practice, I don't mind continuing to practice with you tonight. Anyway, my car won't arrive until tomorrow morning. Feng Ling, she would rather make up for the morning training in the afternoon than accept his devil training again. In her current state, if she did it again, she would probably die on the training ground. After the doctor applied medicine to Feng Ling's wound, he suddenly received a very rich look from Xiao Su and consciously walked out of the infirmary. Do you want me to carry you back, or can you walk back by yourself? Seeing Feng Ling put down her trousers to cover her incredibly white calf, Nan Heng's expression was very indifferent when he spoke, and he still looked cold and dignified. At this time, Feng Ling felt that Nan Heng was actually not only domineering and dangerous, and she felt that in front of this man, there were not always sharp knives and swords. Chapter 761. In the end, of course, she chose to walk by herself. However, halfway through, her waist suddenly tightened. The man behind her saw that she was walking at a snail's pace and impatiently reached out his long arms to pick her up. Feng Ling, boss, I can walk by myself. Watch you crawl back slowly? What a waste of time. Nan Heng didn't even look at her and strode back to her residence with her in his arms. Seeing him like this, Feng Ling's body was indeed not very comfortable, but she did not dare to show too much discomfort. She could only cautiously maintain a solemn expression. When they arrived at the residence, the man placed her on the bed, and Feng Ling rolled on the bed and directly rolled into it. The man who was still leaning over the bed saw her roll into the bed and his eyes darkened. Why did he unintentionally feel that he was going to take advantage of a little girl? What did this guy mean by hiding in the bed so sensitively? Thank you, boss. I wish you a pleasant trip tomorrow, Feng Ling said, leaning against the bed with her back against the wall. Nan Heng turned to look at Feng Ling. His deep eyes were devoid of emotion. He glanced at Feng Ling, who was indeed very thin. Feng Ling still leaned against the wall and raised her head, wondering if her attitude was too calm and indifferent, which made Boss Lee unhappy, so she could only force a smile at him. The doctor said I should have good rest. Can I rest now? Nanheng was originally standing by the bed with his body bent over. From this bed, he could clearly see the youth's slightly pale and somewhat innocent face. Even the clean, fine hair on his cheeks could be seen clearly. Nanheng narrowed his eyes. Feng Ling, how old are you this year? How old? Feng Ling pondered for a moment. I should be about to have my 14th birthday, but I don't know when my birthday is. But the person who took me and set the September of every year as my birthday, so that I can remember my age. In this way, I will be 14 next month. What's wrong, boss? Do I have to be questioned again and again in the base just because I'm so young? Feng Ling obviously didn't understand why Nanheng suddenly asked her about her age. Originally, Nanheng wanted to say that he looked like he was not even 13 years old. How could a young man grow so small and skinny? But in the end, he was about to turn 14. Nanheng didn't expect that Feng Ling would be so disgusted by him asking about his age and thought he was trying to find an excuse to drive him out of the base. Boss, don't worry and leave. I promise that after 2 years, I will be able to pass all the tests. Boss, you don't need to worry about me anymore. Feng Ling tried very hard to maintain a calm tone as she asked him to leave. However, Nanheng appeared not to have heard her. He suddenly raised his hand and grabbed her shoulder, pulling her over from the wall. Feng Ling shuddered and subconsciously tried to dodge, but the man's hand held her shoulder firmly. He then moved down her arm and finally landed on her calf that she had just revealed. Feng Ling was confused. Her instinct to dislike being touched seemed to have been touched. She resisted the urge to kick him away, but her eyes were much colder as she looked up at him. What are you doing? Seeing the cold and sharp look in the boy's eyes, Nanheng said coldly, You don't have any muscles in your body. It sounded like he was a little disgusted. Feng Ling, I will train my muscles sooner or later. Huh? The man sneered, threw her a look that didn't look favorably on her, and directly left. Seeing the man close the door from outside, Feng Ling let out a long sigh and lay down on the bed weakly. She didn't think about anything, but just wanted to sleep. Nanheng remembered that the wound on Feng Ling's knee had just been treated. He turned back to open the door and was about to remind her to change into a loose pair of pants, lest the medicine went to waste. However, when he opened the door, he saw the boy lying on the bed and quickly falling asleep. Nanheng, he was really King brave. How could he fall asleep like this? He was going to leave the base tomorrow. Why didn't he feel any reluctance? Were the children nowadays so King heartless? Looking at the boy who was sleeping motionlessly and was as soft and obedient as a little white cat, Nanheng took a deep breath, narrowed his eyes, and his chest rose and fell. With a bang, he closed the door and left. Feng Ling had always been sensitive. The moment the door was opened again, she woke up. When she heard the door slam, she opened her eyes and stared at the door in a daze. Fortunately, it had not been smashed. She muttered silently, lunatic. Early the next morning, Feng Ling, who had rested for a day, went to the canteen of the base in good spirits and planned to have a good breakfast. However, she didn't expect that most of the members of the base were in the canteen at this time. Because Boss Lee rarely came to the canteen today, it was inevitable that he would leave the base for some good memories, so he planned to have breakfast with everyone. After entering, Feng Ling saw the tall figure sitting on the long table by the window. She just glanced at him and didn't go over to say hello like the other members, nor did she say any words of reluctance. She turned and went inside to get food for herself. Then she carried a large portion of food to the farthest seat from Nanheng, picked up the tableware, and began to eat, completely ignoring the man who was waiting for her to say hello to him. At this moment, even Kay felt that Feng Ling was too arrogant. Boss was going to leave. Since they met here, she had to say goodbye to him. After all, Boss would come back in 2 years, and Boss would always be the boss here. Even if he was not here, he could remotely control everything in the base, so she couldn't neglect him. It was quite necessary to say goodbye to him and leave a way out for herself. But Feng Ling, this blockhead, didn't move at all. She was still sitting there eating. None of the people in the canteen went to get food. At this moment, they were all looking for opportunities to approach Nan Heng and turned to see Feng Ling sitting there eating. What was this boy doing? Was he looking down on Boss Li's status? Now, in the entire canteen, only Feng Ling sitting there and Nan Heng sitting by the window were eating. Was this boy so careless? Boss didn't like him. This time, he probably wanted to kick him out even more. Nan Heng really didn't expect that Feng Ling could be so careless. His fingers holding the tableware loosened and loosened again. In the end, he couldn't bear it anymore, threw the tableware down, got up, and walked out. When he got outside, the Li family's car was already waiting for him. He didn't know who young Master Li was waiting for in the canteen today. Nan Heng got in the car and didn't even roll down the window to look out. Drive. 2 very cold words, without a trace of warmth. Dash. Chapter 762. The driver shivered and immediately started the engine without daring to say a word. After the car drove out of the base, the driver glanced at Li Nanheng through the rearview mirror. Seeing that there was some inexplicable hostility and coldness in his eyes, he asked tentatively after a while, "Young Master Li, is it because you're going back to the Li family that makes you feel uncomfortable, or did someone offend you in this base? Who are you venting your anger on?" Nanheng snorted coldly. "Do I look angry?" The driver. "Maybe you do." Nanheng didn't speak this time and indifferently looked out of the window at the scenery outside the base and the long road that quickly passed by. What was he angry about? Angry with a 13 or 14-year-old kid? And it was a F** king guy? Nanheng raised his good-looking eyebrows and tried to find a reason. It was probably because it was rare to see such a potential newcomer, so he had to pay more attention to him. He picked up the phone and called Han Jin. After the call was connected, he said indifferently, "In the 2 years I am away, you will be responsible for strengthening Feng Ling's physical training every day. 2 years later, I want to see a basic candidate for a long-range sniper." After hanging up the phone, Han Jin had just walked into the canteen of the base and looked up, only to see that Feng Ling was still sitting inside, still eating breakfast calmly. He wanted Feng Ling to basically become a sniper in 2 years. Boss probably wanted Feng Ling to be fitted with a spring that didn't need to rest 24 hours a day. This was really a test of Feng Ling's patience. He didn't know if this child could bear it. At this moment, Feng Ling was fighting with a round boiled egg on her plate. She tried for a long time, but failed to pick it up, and it kept rolling in her chopsticks. In the end, she picked up the fork and stabbed it expressionlessly, biting more than half of it. She hadn't expected what kind of devil training she would face in the next 2 years, nor did she know how many people Boss Li had told to strengthen her training before he left. On the 3rd day after Nanheng left, Feng Ling was dug out of bed by Han Jin in the middle of the night and said that she was going to do physical training. She was doing push-ups on the training ground, and Han Jin took a close-up photo of her with his cell phone in one hand and sent it to Boss Li as if it was his work. Nan Heng was in the bedroom of the Li family's villa. He had just come out of the shower. He rubbed his short hair with one hand and picked up the phone that had just lit up on the bed with the other. He swiped it open and saw this photo. In the photo, Feng Ling was doing push-ups because she had just been dug out of bed. She was not wearing a formal uniform. She was only wearing loose pajamas, and because of her push-ups, the pajamas were loose, revealing her collarbone. Nan Heng's gaze paused, moving along the beautiful collarbone to look at the young man's sweaty hair hanging between his eyebrows. He frowned and replied to Han Jin, "Tell him to put on his clothes before coming out to train." Han Jin quickly replied, "Got it," but in his heart, he was confused. It was late at night, and it was just a temporary special training at night. Even he had come out wearing a t-shirt. Was he going to ask Feng Ling to wear a uniform at night? After thinking about it, Han Jin simply sent another message to boss. If Feng Ling wears a uniform during the day, I'm afraid that he will have to change his uniform every month. No matter how good the quality of the clothes is, they can't stand being worn 24 hours a day. Nanheng did not reply. However, a week later, Han Jin suddenly received a package in 11 base. When he opened it, it turned out to be a few sets of special black uniforms of the same quality as the ones Boss Lee usually wore. This kind of clothes could only be worn by the members of the base who went out on missions. The uniforms worn by the newcomers in the base were different. Although they looked similar on the surface, there was a very expensive protective layer inside, which cost tens of thousands of yuan to make. Han Jin took it out and checked. There were 10 sets in total. However, the size of these 10 sets of uniforms could not be worn by other members of the base. At first glance, it seemed that only Feng Ling could wear them. Han Jin, boss, aren't you being too obvious with your intentions? Feng Ling was just a child, thinking that there might be something wrong with Boss's sexual orientation, and then thinking that he had taken a bath with Boss Lee in the bathhouse of the base, and that he had picked up the soap in front of him. In an instant, he felt terrible. At night, the housekeeper of the Lee family knocked on the door and came in. Seeing that young Master Lee was still awake, he planned to come in and talk to him, only to see young Master Lee sitting on the balcony smoking. Although young Master Lee usually smoked a lot, after returning to the Lee family, his smoking addiction seemed to be particularly strong. He didn't like to go back to the Lee family and be dominated by the elders of the Lee family. He hated this place, but as the eldest son and the only heir of the Lee family, these were the responsibilities he had to bear. Even if he didn't want to go back, he had to. But usually, when young Master Lee came back, he basically went to bed early. Why was he sitting on the balcony smoking at this time tonight? The housekeeper had just opened the floor-to-ceiling window and walked over with a cup of coffee in his hand. He wanted to talk to him on the pretext of delivering coffee, but when he looked down, he saw that young Master Lee was holding his cell phone in his other hand. He curiously leaned over to take a look, wanted to see who young Master Lee was talking to or what he was looking at so late at night. Otherwise, why didn't he sleep? However, the moment he leaned over, he only saw a photo of a young boy doing push-ups. Before he could see it clearly, the cell phone screen suddenly went dark. What are you doing here? Li Nanheng put out the cigarette, took the coffee, and put it on the coffee table on the balcony, his eyes cold. The housekeeper paused and thought that the boy in the photo should be a member of 11 Base, right? He didn't think that young Master Lee was willing to take over such a big responsibility of 11 Base. Even when he was sent to 11 Base at a young age, young Master Lee resisted for a long time and had a rebellious mentality for a long time. Finally, he gradually accepted it because of the responsibility, but he always ignored the affairs of the base and completely left them to his subordinates and other members of the Lee family. In recent years, he found that young Master Lee was a little more concerned about the base, but he didn't expect that he was so concerned about the base now. It was rare for him to leave the base for 2 years. At home, he had to check the training of the base members from time to time and even send training photos to him for inspection. Chapter 763. Feng Ling found that recently, when she was training every day, people around her kept glancing at her. It had been like this since she wore the new clothes that Han Jin brought her. She had never studied the difference between these uniforms, and they looked the same when they stood together. So why on earth were these people looking at her? The point was that when these people looked at her, their eyes were shining as if they had a special fondness for her clothes. She was a little puzzled and asked Han Jin after the training. Han Jin only replied, maybe it's because your clothes are all new. They look newer than theirs. Just like that? Weren't the uniforms provided for free? As long as they were worn out, they could directly get another set? At that time, she also wanted to get a set, but because there was no size that she could wear, she had to wait for a few days. In the end, Han Jin suddenly sent her a few sets. She thought that it was specially made according to her size, and it was no different from others. until Kay told her in private that the uniform she was wearing was of the same standard and quality as the one Boss Lee usually wore in the base. It was sandwiched with a protective layer that ordinary knives and guns couldn't easily penetrate, so people couldn't see the difference. However, after a long time of contact with Boss Lee, many people could see the difference. He also said that this kind of uniform could only be worn when going out to do dangerous tasks, and other newcomers and training members were not qualified to wear it. This time, Feng Ling didn't ask Han Jin anything. She vaguely felt that this kind of uniform was definitely not something that Han Jin, the deputy drill master of Team 1, could easily make the decision. It was no good to ask more. Anyway, there was no difference in wearing it, and she found that this uniform was indeed much stronger than the one she wore before. At least after half a month of continuous training, it was not worn or scratched at all. The quality was really good. In the evening, Feng Ling took the new cell phone that Han Jin bought for her. Of course, the money to buy the cell phone was the bonus for her ranking first in the previous special training assessments, which was about 30,000 yuan. She gave 3,000 yuan to Han Jin to buy a cell phone for her. Unlike other newcomers, she was not allowed to leave the base at will. She fiddled with the cell phone and looked at the number saved by Han Jin. She didn't know what Han Jin was thinking. Why did he save Nanheng's number in the address book of her cell phone? But after thinking about it, she still clicked on the text message page. She didn't know how to use the old cell phone that Kay gave her in the past, and Kay taught her everything. Now she had learned it, but the first text message in her life was sent to Li Nanheng. Feng Ling, boss, are these uniforms specially made according to my size? Is the cost included in the base's account, or is it your own money? How much is it? I will pay you back. She thought about how she still had more than 20,000 yuan in her hands. This money should be enough to pay back the debt. 5 minutes later, she received a reply. Nanheng? Question mark. It was a very cold and indifferent question mark. Looking at the words she typed, he should be able to guess who she was, but she sent a question mark instead. For the sake of her clothes and the fact that Boss Lee did not drive her out of the base and even gave her a chance to earn a bonus, Feng Ling patiently sent another message. I am Feng Ling. This time, rank. Li Feng Ling Nanheng got the special training ranking. Did you buy a new cell phone? Get out and do physical training. If I find that you don't sleep and send text messages at night, I will ask Han Jin to confiscate all your bonuses. Feng Ling. Boss Lee, are you a devil? It was rare for her to say thank you in her life, but this was the result? Feng Ling simply stopped replying. She threw the cell phone on the bed, changed her clothes, got up, and went out. When she opened the door, she saw Han Jin waiting for her outside. The routine special training every night didn't miss a single night. It was easy to guess who gave the order before leaving. Otherwise, Han Jin had to train her alone at night after a tiring day. Feng Ling turned her wrist and said, Let's go. Aren't we training physical strength and shooting today? Han Jin raised his eyebrows. How is your cell phone? Not bad. Looking at the boy who was still calm and indifferent, Han Jin turned and walked out quietly. As he walked, he remembered that Boss Lee had specially called him during the day and asked him to buy a convenient cell phone for Feng Ling. He looked back at Feng Ling, who seemed to be unaware of his words. TSK, Boss really put a lot of thought into this. If Feng Ling knew that he was now a piece of fat meat targeted by Boss, he would probably escape from 11 base overnight. The Li family's villa. Nanheng waited for more than 10 minutes, but did not receive any reply from Feng Ling. He glanced at the cell phone and then at the message box, which was still silent. He waited for a while, but there was still no reply. The man stared at the cell phone gloomily, tapped the screen of the cell phone with his fingers, pressed the numbers one by one, and saved Feng Ling's new cell phone number. The Li family had been supported by a few brothers of the Li family in the past. In just a few decades, it had achieved an extraordinary status in the United States. And the Li family had always been ruled by men. From Li Nanheng's grandfather to several brothers and cousins with the same surname, the 4 elders of the Li family, regardless of rank or seniority, each had a certain prestige in the military area. In the Li family's villa, the elders didn't care much and usually drank tea to discuss Li Nanheng's marriage, the future development of 11 base, and the future direction of the Lee family. Some time ago, they mentioned the marriage to Lee Non-hung, but he coldly and seriously refused. The elders were not in a hurry. While talking about Lee Non-hung's instantly darkened face, they talked about the type of men that young people like nowadays, and then talked about the past. Non-hung has not been in the base recently. Hasn't Ah-Fong been temporarily sent to manage the base? What's the news from Ah-Fong? Are the new blood in the base better than the old members when we founded the base? Nowadays, the newcomers haven't experienced the war decades ago and haven't participated in an actual battle. They can't understand what killing is at all. It can't be said that there is no talent, but it's really rare. I heard from Ah-Fong that there's a young newcomer recently. He seems to be called Feng Ling. He is agile, and his moves are so fast that people can hardly see him clearly. He has great potential. Yes, I've also heard about that Feng Ling. He is indeed young, but it is said that he ranked first in this special training assessment. I have seen the video recorded at the assessment site. His one move is indeed better than the other newcomers' 4 or 5 moves. His marksmanship is also very perfect. If he is trained well, he will be a good seedling. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.